Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax too, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1: The Smiling Corpse. I moved to the small town of Elmridge on a winter day when the wind howled through bare branches and the pale sun barely cast its light before sinking behind the western ridge. The house I rented sat on the edge of town, old but quiet. I thought I had chosen the perfect place to start over, until the neighbor died. Her name was Myrtle Glass, an elderly woman, close to 80, who lived alone in the silver-gray house right next door. Every morning, I'd see her sitting on the porch, trembling hands holding a teacup, eyes fixed on the woods, like she was waiting for someone to return. No one in the neighborhood really talked to her. People said she was strange. No visitors, no relatives, no signs of life beyond her own shadow. But she never caused any trouble until Monday morning. I saw the ambulance outside her house at 6 a.m. Two paramedics entered without a word. They emerged 10 minutes later, wheeling a stretcher under a white sheet. I didn't have to ask, I knew. A sudden chill swept through the air as they rolled her across the dew-soaked grass. Under the sheet, I caught a glimpse of her face, pale, stiff, and her mouth curved slightly upward, as if she was smiling. That evening, my house felt heavy. I turned on every light, played soft music to push away the dread. She had only been my neighbor, but something about her death left a wrongness in the air. No one said exactly how she died. They called it natural causes. But the look in the officer's eyes when he watched her body leave wasn't natural at all. 2 days later, the silence began to break. Around midnight, as I was reading in the living room, I heard a strange sound, like fingernails gently scratching at the back window. Living alone makes you notice everything. At first, I thought it was a stray cat, but the sound didn't stop. It was rhythmic, slow, persistent. Then came the faint clatter, like nails dragging across wood. I crept toward the back door, holding my breath. The curtain swayed slightly in the draft. I pulled it back, just a little, and my heart nearly stopped. A figure stood outside, hunched, hair tangled, face pressed against the glass. It was Myrtle, but no, not really. Her eyes were sunken, pupils rolled back into white, and her twisted smile. It was still there, frozen, mocking, grotesque. I screamed and collapsed to the floor. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. The next morning, I drove 3 miles out to the town morgue. It was run by a middle-aged man named Calvin. He had the kind of eyes that had seen too much. I gathered my courage and asked about Myrtle. Calvin was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "You're the third person to ask about her today," he said, "and I'll tell you this. Her body disappeared from the freezer early yesterday morning." I went cold. There was no break-in. No one entered. The cameras, they glitched at exactly 2:13 a.m. When the feed came back, the freezer door was wide open, and she was gone. I didn't know what was worse. Someone stealing her body, or the possibility that it walked out on its own. The next night, the neighborhood erupted. Police were called to the Mallory's house, 2 doors down, because their daughter screamed in the middle of the night, saying the pale old lady was staring at me from the window. Security footage caught a glimpse. A small figure, long grey hair, and a wide, unnatural smile. I couldn't sleep anymore. In the dark, I began to hear it. Soft laughter, not loud, not clear, but constant and unmistakable. Laughter that seemed to echo from beneath the floor or from inside the walls. One night, I dreamt I was trapped inside the morgue. The smell of formaldehyde was thick in the air. Lights flickered. Scratching sounds grew louder. Moans. And then Myrtle, crawling out from the freezer. She didn't walk. She slithered. Hands curled, black nails scraping the tiles. Every time I screamed, she laughed louder, until her mouth stretched wide, all the way to her ears. I woke up gasping and found the back door wide open. I called the police. They took my statement, but didn't act. This town was too small, and people didn't want to believe in superstitions. But I know I'm not crazy. 3 days later, a teenager went missing. The night before, his mother said he saw a strange old woman sitting in the garage, smiling to herself for 3 straight hours. Myrtle didn't just come back. She's looking for something, or someone, and I'm afraid I'm on her list. Ever since that night the back door swung open, I started locking it twice. Every evening, I checked the locks, pulled the curtains tight, and wedged a wooden chair in front of the door, as if a flimsy chair could stop something that didn't belong to this world. I couldn't sleep deeply. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile again. The kind of smile that looked like it had been stitched in place with hundreds of pins, stretching the skin until it tore. I didn't dare tell anyone. Elmridge was already buzzing with rumors. I didn't want to become their next dinner table topic, but I knew, without a doubt, Myrtle wasn't at rest. And now she was coming back, night after night. One Saturday morning, I decided to return to the Elmridge morgue. I needed to speak with Calvin again. But this time, the doors were locked. A sheet of A4 paper taped to the glass read, "Temporarily closed due to technical issues." As I turned to leave, a voice came from behind me. "You looking for Calvin?" I turned around to see a middle-aged woman with a tight bun and stern face, dressed in hospital scrubs. "I'm Nurse Karen. Calvin. He's been missing for 3 days. Left his phone, his car, everything. The police haven't found a trace. But I know it has something to do with that old woman, Myrtle Glass." She lowered her voice, eyes darting around nervously. "I was the last one to see the body before it disappeared. She didn't look dead. Her skin was still soft. Her eyes were open. I swear I saw her lips move." I invited Karen back to my place. We sat in the kitchen, curtains drawn, door bolted. The silence was suffocating. "I've worked in that morgue for 17 years, Karen said, voice trembling. "I've seen accident victims, suicides, even murders. But I've never seen anything like this. Myrtle's body, it wouldn't decompose. Her skin stayed warm. The freezer wouldn't freeze her. Every night we heard scratching like someone trying to claw their way out." I swallowed hard. Karen pulled something from her coat pocket, wrapped in a tissue. "I found this the morning she went missing." I unwrapped it. A fingernail, long, yellowed, caked in dried blood. At the base, a sliver of raw flesh still clung to it. "Calvin found it under freezer drawer number 3, Karen whispered. That was Myrtle's drawer. That night I began hearing knocks. 3 of them. Knock, knock, knock. Not from the front door, not from the back, but from inside the walls. I pressed my ear to the kitchen wall. Nothing. But when the lights were off, I heard it clearly, like someone buried alive, knocking steadily, relentlessly, with pure hatred. I called Karen. "Did you ever hear strange noises coming from the morgue's cold storage?" "I didn't," she said. "But Calvin did. He told me one night he heard someone singing a lullaby softly, like it was coming from beneath the morgue floor. And that place, that's where the fire happened, in '87. That sealed room where they stored the unidentified corpses." A chill ran through me. "And Myrtle? No one knows where she came from?" Karen said. "Town records have no data before 1999. All her paperwork is smudged, as if forged or from somewhere that doesn't exist." I started digging deeper. At the town library, I scoured old news articles. Then I found it. A newspaper clipping from 1987 describing a fire that destroyed a refugee camp in the western woods of Elmridge. Among the unidentified victims, Caucasian female, estimated age 40-50, known for maintaining an unnatural smile, burned in a kneeling position, hands clasped tightly to chest. Final note: no one claimed the body, temporarily buried in the sub-level cold storage beneath Elmridge morgue. I stared at the grainy black and white photo. Even with the poor quality, she was smiling. That night, my bathroom mirror began to change, not crack, not fog up, change. I looked into it, and instead of my reflection, I saw another place. A long, dark hallway, the floor stained with old blood. And from inside the mirror, a woman crawled out. Her arms were too long. Her nails scraped across the glass. She stopped, stared right at me, and smiled. I shattered the mirror. As I swept up the shards, I found something embedded in the glass. A name tag from the hospital. The writing nearly faded. Myrtle G. Karen and I decided to go to the sub-level morgue, the one sealed off for decades. That night, we broke in. The sub-level was a maze of damp corridors, reeking of mildew and decay. Karen trembled as she unlocked the final metal door. Inside were 14 body drawers. Only 9 were closed. The other 5 were empty. In one corner, claw marks scraped the wall, stretching up to the ceiling. Old blood stained the surface, dried into a dark crust, and scrawled in smeared brown-red letters. "I'm looking for the one who locked me here." Karen collapsed to her knees, crying. I think Calvin was the one who locked her here. He was obsessed with the fire. Maybe he kept her trapped. I looked around. The room had turned icy cold. A soft laugh echoed from somewhere close. No, not from the hallway. From inside one of the drawers. Drawer number 7. Slowly, opening. Drawer number 7 creaked open with a chilling sound. Click. Creak, like rotted wood being scraped by fingernails. Karen froze, eyes locked on the slightly ajar metal door. I took a step back, hand instinctively tightening around the flashlight, breath catching in my throat. Inside the drawer, there was no body, only a crumpled white dress, covered in ash and dark brown stains. I recognized it instantly. It was Myrtle's dress, the one she had been wearing when she was brought to the morgue. But what truly froze the blood in my veins was what sat atop the fabric. A Polaroid photograph. I picked it up. In the photo was me, standing at my front door, holding a morning coffee. It couldn't have been from a security camera. The angle was too low, too close. Like someone had crawled through the grass and taken the photo from just a few feet away. "No way," I whispered, heart racing. Karen shook her head over and over, beginning to mutter prayers. Then she fell silent, eyes wide. I turned. Above us on the ceiling, a long black smear was spreading, like motor oil. It slithered along a metal pipe, dripping down onto the floor. I raised my flashlight, and I saw her. Myrtle, or what was left of her, crawling upside down along the ceiling. Her eyes bulged all sclera, and her mouth still wore that horrifying smile. But now, the corners of her lips had torn up to her ears, revealing rotted black teeth and a swollen purple tongue. She crawled like a spider, silent, her fingernails scraping steadily in our direction. Karen screamed. I grabbed her and ran. The sound of metal nails scraping overhead echoed behind us. Clack, clack, like demonic chains being dragged. We sprinted through the sub-level corridor, up the stairwell, and burst through the steel exit door. Karen collapsed onto the concrete outside, and I doubled over, gasping for breath. But when I turned back toward the door, no one was there. Only a folded piece of paper stuck in the crack. I pulled it out, a hand-drawn map, and a scrawled red message. This isn't the first place. There are 3 more. That night, Karen didn't go home. She called her husband, told him she wasn't feeling well, and would stay at my place. I knew she was lying, for my sake. But in her eyes, something had taken root. A fear not easily brushed off. I laid out a blanket for her on the sofa and tossed in my bed for hours. The clock struck 2 a.m. Just as I began to drift off, I heard laughter. Not from afar, from inside my room. I shot upright, heart thudding. The darkness was thick, but the laughter remained, soft, wet, distorted. I turned on the light. Nothing. I walked to the mirror above my dresser, the one I'd replaced after the last incident. And this time, I saw Karen. But the Karen in the mirror was smiling. Not the tired, wan smile I knew, but a twisted grin, just like Myrtle's. A contorted, trembling mouth stretched wide, as if stitched in place with wire. I turned sharply toward the living room. Karen was still there, softly snoring. I looked back at the mirror. Karen still smiled. Panic broke loose. I grabbed the nearest table lamp and smashed the mirror into 100 pieces. The laughter stopped instantly, but in the last shard that hit the floor, I saw something etched faintly along the edge. I'll borrow her face first. The next morning, I woke Karen and told her everything. Her face went pale. She touched her cheeks and asked over and over, Was I smiling? Did I smile last night? We sat across from each other in the kitchen, sunlight flooding the room. But nothing made me feel safer. From this moment on, I knew Myrtle didn't need a body anymore. She was coming through mirrors, through dreams, and even through the living. Karen suddenly asked, Do you still have the map? I nodded and pulled out the wrinkled paper. Next to the sketch were 3 red dots, connected by a jagged line. Karen studied them carefully. This is an old map of Elmridge, before the asylum fire. Here, this is the ruined chapel near Cinder Forest, and this is the abandoned underground water station. The 3rd place. What is it? I asked. Karen swallowed. It's the old holding cells, beneath the Elmridge Psychiatric Hospital. I clenched the paper. These places. Maybe they once held Myrtle, or what was inside her. She was dead, yes, but her spirit had been split, hidden, and now, piece by piece, it was waking up. That afternoon, we drove to the ruined chapel, a crumbling structure deep in Cinder Forest, once a shelter for the homeless during the 1980s. The wind slipped through rotted beams, making the roof creak like a forgotten language. We stepped inside, shafts of light cutting through broken stained glass, painting fractured patterns on the ground. In the center of the sanctuary stood a headless statue of Christ. Beneath it, on the stone floor, was a carved circle and a large black scorch mark. Karen stepped closer, trembling. There are handprints. I saw them, 5 prints, embedded in the ash, each one pointing in a different direction, but all from the same central circle, as if 5 people had tried to crawl out from that spot. Inside the circle, written in faded blood, was a single line. The one who laughs first is the last to survive. As we stepped out of the chapel, I turned to look back one last time, and I saw Myrtle standing on the stone dais, wrapped in that crumpled white dress, clutching the photo I'd found in drawer number 7. She smiled. A grin now stretched all the way to her ears. And then she raised her hand and waved. We arrived at the pump station on a bitterly cold morning. The sky was smothered in grey clouds, and the air felt thick, as if something invisible was pressing down on the town. Karen brought along a map printed in 1985, marking the location of the underground pump once used to divert water from Lake Elmridge to the old residential district. It had been shut down after a fatal accident. 3 workers disappeared while operating underground, and the authorities never recovered the bodies. All that remained of the station was a rusted metal hatch, hidden behind a thick grove of trees nearly 2 miles off the main road. A sign reading "No entry, deadly hazard" swung weakly in the wind like a feeble warning, but not enough to stop us. Karen used a wooden plank to pry the hatch open. The rusted hinges screamed into the air, louder than the forest birds. A wave of mold and rust surged up, an overwhelming stench of buried history mingled with corpses yet to rot. A spiral metal staircase plunged into the earth. I turned on my flashlight, aiming it downward. No bottom in sight, only darkness. "You sure you want to do this?" Karen asked. I nodded, though my legs had already started to tremble. If Myrtle split her soul into 3 places, this has to be one of them. We can't ignore it. We stepped inside. The underground passage twisted and turned like the intestines of some massive beast. Water dripped steadily from cracked pipes above. The echo of our footsteps on the concrete floor clashed together, creating a chaotic rhythm, like someone was following close behind. Eventually, we reached a heavy iron door. Karen lit the oil lamp she brought along. The sickly yellow glow revealed something carved into the wall with iron nails. "The one who smiles doesn't die. He only sleeps." I pushed the door open. It creaked ajar, revealing a vast domed room. And the first thing I saw was a wall of human faces. Not sculptures, not paintings. Real faces, pressed into the concrete, frozen in sheer terror, eyes bulging, mouths agape. Some still had hair, wet and limp, like they'd been submerged. Karen gasped, nearly dropping the lamp. At the center of the room was a drained reservoir basin, at the bottom of which yawned a black pit. At the pit's edge sat a wooden chair, and on it, a porcelain doll in a white dress. The doll had silver hair, cracked skin, and a smile that stretched to its ears. I stepped closer and shined my flashlight into its eyes. It wasn't just a toy. Its eyes had whites, real ones. I leaned in, and my heart clenched. The dress the doll wore was Myrtle's. Beneath the lace, A folded scrap of paper fell to the floor. I picked it up. It was a journal entry, handwritten in red ink, the letters blurred by moisture. August 16th, 1987. They locked me down here because I knew the truth. Because I knew how to make pain never die. They thought I'd be silent in the water in the dark. But I laughed. And that laugh lasted longer than any scream. Karen grabbed my hand and whispered, "We need to go, now." But just then, I heard something from the pit. Plop, 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 like thick bubbles rising from the depths. I stepped back, but Karen's oil lamp suddenly went out. The room was swallowed by thick darkness. Panicking, I turned on my flashlight. The beam flickered, batteries dying. And then, the chair was empty. The doll was gone. I pressed my back to the wall, hands trembling around the flashlight. Karen whispered, "Where is it? Did you see where it went?" That's when the laughter started. Not from the pit, but from behind us. I spun around. A face, no eyes, no nose, just a gaping mouth filled with black teeth, emerged from the wall. It didn't fully come out, just pulsed in and out like water, as if the wall itself were a rippling lake echoing its laughter. I yanked Karen's hand and we ran. But the hallway had changed. No more spiral stairs. Now it was an endless corridor lined with dusty mirrors, fogged and dirty, yet each one reflected a different Myrtle. One mirror showed her young, in a nurse's uniform. Another showed her hair tangled, skin scorched. Another, she was slicing her own stomach open with a surgical blade. Every version was smiling at me. At last, I saw the iron door again. I lunged forward, banging hard. Karen screamed behind me, "Hurry, it's getting closer." The door flung open. We burst out into daylight, the sunlight so blinding I nearly collapsed. But when I turned to look back, the entrance was gone. No hatch, no pump station, just open ground and weeds, as if the place had never existed. Karen fell to her knees, screaming in terror. I looked down. In my palm, something rested. A tooth, a human tooth, still fresh with blood, and on the inside of my shirt, a message had been printed in bold red ink. Next station, where I go insane. A week after we escaped the pumping station, Karen was no longer herself. She began whispering to herself at night, sitting for hours in front of the shattered mirror in the living room, as if having a conversation with someone on the other side of the glass. Once, I caught her writing something on the mirror with lipstick, lines repeated over and over again. They don't hear me laugh, but I still laugh. They locked me up. Locked me. Locked me. I wiped it clean. But the next morning, the words returned. This time, written in blood. I wasn't sure Karen was Karen anymore. And I knew, if we didn't reach the final location marked on the map, I would be the next one to be replaced. The Elmridge Psychiatric Hospital was shut down in 1992. After a scandal, the media had tried hard to bury. Some said patients were experimented on with unapproved sedatives. Others whispered about a nurse possessed by spirits who stabbed 4 doctors to death before gouging out her own eyes. But the darkest rumor was about an unnamed female patient, locked for 10 years in an isolation room. No files, no relatives. The staff had only one name for her, the woman who knew how to smile. Karen and I stood in front of the asylum gates at dusk. The 3-story building was overgrown with dry, dead vines. Broken windows gaped like open wounds. Paint peeled from the walls, revealing rotting bricks beneath. No sounds, no wind, no birds, No cars, only silence, screaming. Karen was barely there. Her eyes were glazed, her mouth hung slightly open. That smile had begun to fix itself onto her face. But she followed me anyway, like a shadow. We pushed open the front doors. The hinges moaned like something in pain. The smell hit us. Dust, mold, and the sharp sting of old disinfectants. The hall was pitch black. Broken tiles scattered the floor. On the walls still clung faded motivational posters. Keep your spirits high. Smile every day to feel alive. How ironic. The ground floor was nothing but empty intake rooms, shattered desks, and faded portraits of long-forgotten doctors. We found the stairwell leading to the basement. The former isolation ward. A thick rusted chain barred the way. I used bolt cutters. It took nearly 10 minutes to break through. When the final door creaked open, a wave of icy air hit us, like opening a freezer filled with corpses. Karen began to laugh softly. I turned. Her face was twitching, muscles pulling in strange directions. But she said nothing and kept walking. The basement was a maze of narrow halls, faded white-gray walls, fluorescent lights flickering as if ready to die. I spotted footprints on the floor, small, round, possibly a child's. We reached a door with a warning sign, "Do not enter, room 302, isolation." It wasn't locked. I pushed it open gently. The room was small, no windows. 4 padded walls, torn and rotting, foam yellowing and exposed, and covering every inch of the walls were faces, all of them smiling. No two were the same. Some were men, women, children, elderly, even animal-like. But every single one wore a smile. At the center of the room sat a decaying leather restraint chair, and in the chair was a human skull. Not an ordinary skull. It had a long fracture stretching from the cheek to the temple, and the mouth, still full of teeth, was frozen in an impossibly wide, haunting grin. I stepped forward, reaching out to lift the skull. When I heard Karen whisper, she sat there for 10 years and smiled until her face cracked open. I spun around. "How do you know that?" Karen blinked, then smiled, wider than I'd ever seen on a human face. "Because I am her," I screamed, stumbling back toward the door. Karen, or whatever had taken her, rose slowly. Her eyes rolled back, mouth twisting like invisible strings were pulling at the corners. "Each of you locked me away. Every place was a prison. The refugee camp, the pumping station, the morgue. And this is where I went mad." The room began to shake. The painted faces on the wall started blinking. Some moved, opened their mouths to grin wider. Laughter echoed through the halls, from the vents, from beneath the floor. I bolted, ran blindly down the corridor. Doors slammed shut behind me. Lights flickered violently. I no longer knew where I was going, until I slammed into someone. A man, wearing an old patient gown. Eyes empty, but his mouth smiling. "Welcome back, Myrtle," he whispered. I woke up in a white room, white walls, white floor, white ceiling, and a small mirror mounted on the steel door. I looked around. No Karen. I walked to the mirror, looked in, and I didn't see myself. I saw Myrtle, younger, smiling at me. I banged on the glass, screamed, but no sound came, only laughter, rising from my own mouth. I was inside the mirror. Story 2, The Funeral Portrait That Smiled at Night. I moved to San Jose, California after my grandmother passed away early last spring. Her old house was in the suburbs, about a 20-minute drive from downtown, where ancient oak trees stretched their shadows over the backyard, and the sound of traffic was muffled by rows of time-worn wooden fences. I hadn't planned to stay long. Honestly, I just intended to come clean things up, put the house on the market, and return to my busy life in New York. But then, things changed. My grandmother, Evelyn, was a strong, stern woman, her gaze sharp as a blade. But she was always gentle when she stroked my hair on the nights I cried from nightmares. She died in her sleep, peacefully, just slipped away. At the funeral, I chose a photo of her at about 60 years old to place on the altar. A monochrome portrait with steady eyes and a stoic expression. I remember picking it because it looked calm, almost cold. But just 3 days after I moved into the house, the first strange thing happened. That morning, as I headed to the kitchen to make coffee, I passed the fireplace, where the memorial photo sat alongside a few simple offerings. What caught my eye was a smile, faint, almost imperceptible unless you looked closely. But I was sure, absolutely sure, that smile hadn't been there before. I ran upstairs immediately to find the original print of the photo. No smile. Her face was still serious, just as I remembered. But the photo on the altar was smiling. I told myself it was the light, the fireplace glass. Or maybe I was just tired. I laughed it off, reassured myself, and went to work. But that night, I heard shuffling footsteps. At first, it was a soft dragging sound, like someone was sliding an old pair of slippers along the hallway behind the kitchen. I froze. There was no one else in the house. I lived alone. No pets. Every door was locked. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath. No knock, no voice. Just silence. A chilling, unnatural silence. I didn't dare open the door. I sat there, hugging a pillow, back pressed against the headboard, until morning light spilled through the curtains. The next morning, I took the photo down and replaced it with one from a family picnic in 1978 when she was young. Nothing unusual, no smile. I felt relieved. Until the second night, the shuffling returned. But this time, I heard something else too. A sigh. Long, heavy, and weary. Like it came from someone who had lived 100 years and was struggling to let go of something too heavy to bear. At dawn, when I walked downstairs, the photo had changed again. It was still the picnic photo, but her lips were slightly upturned. Not obvious, but definitely there. I started recording. I set up a camera, facing the fireplace, aimed directly at the photo. I let it run all night. The next morning, I watched the footage. Nothing, no sounds, no movement, no changes. But the photo in the video was different from the one on the altar. In the recording, she wasn't smiling. But in real life, that same faint smile was there, as if it only appeared when someone actually looked at it. I took the photo to a print shop. The man behind the counter, a Mexican guy in his 40s, frowned the moment he saw it. "Where'd you take this?" he asked. "I didn't. It's an old photo." He shook his head. "There's something wrong with it. I see something off in her eyes." I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. On the way home, I realized someone was following me. A black SUV without plates quietly trailed me for almost 5 minutes. When I turned into an alley, it vanished. But when I arrived home, I had the distinct feeling someone had been inside before me. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place, but the living room chair had been moved. The kitchen curtain was pushed aside, and the new photo was lying face down on the floor. Frame shattered. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the local priest to perform a blessing. Father Michael was an Irishman with a gentle demeanor and serious but kind eyes. When he entered the house, the photo, now placed in a new frame, was sitting on the table. He glanced at it and stopped. "This is, Evelyn?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed. "I met her once. She was complicated, carried a heavy past. Did you know she used to work as a nurse in the old Fremont care facility?" I shook my head. He continued slowly. "There were rumors that she was involved in an unexplained death back in the 80s. A patient disappeared, never found. After that, the facility shut down." I was speechless. Memories of her came flooding back. How she'd stare into a blank TV screen for hours, or stand motionless in front of the mirror late at night. Father Michael began the ritual. He sprinkled holy water, prayed, and laid a hand on the photo frame. The moment his fingers touched it, a small burn mark appeared on the back of his hand. He pulled away, gasping. "This doesn't want to be let go." That night, I ran from the house, stayed at a hotel for a week, but no matter where I was, I still heard the dragging slippers, still heard the sigh, still felt her eyes watching me from a place no one should ever look back toward. I returned home after 7 nights in a motel off Highway 70, where the bed was hard as stone and the AC wheezed all night like the labored breath of something that didn't exist. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape. The sound of shuffling slippers followed me into my dreams. That sighing, like something trapped between two worlds, and the photo still haunted my mind. That faint smile, just enough to raise goosebumps whenever I remembered it. I needed answers. I started where Father Michael had mentioned, Fremont Oak Haven Nursing Home, about a 30-minute drive from my grandmother's house. It was now an abandoned complex, its wooden doors rotting, walls overtaken by moss and ivy. The rusted gate still bore the faded sign, Fremont Oak Haven, care like family. In the dim gray light of a cloudy afternoon, the slogan felt more like mockery than comfort. The front door was chained shut. But I didn't come alone. I had found someone online, a blogger named Derek, who specialized in exploring abandoned places. He came armed with flashlights, cameras, and a small stun gun hidden under his coat. He'd heard of this place, but no one had dared enter since 2004. The year a group of college students got lost inside for 9 hours and couldn't remember a single thing afterward. We snuck in through a broken window in the back. The air was thick with the stench of mold, old urine, and lingering disinfectant. Inside, it was pitch black, our footsteps echoing over broken tile. The reception desk still had the old 1986 shift schedule posted. I shivered when I saw a familiar name, Evelyn H., night nurse, Wing D, terminal wing. I turned to Derek and whispered, "My grandmother worked here, that exact wing." We moved toward Wing D. The flashlight flickered over rusted hospital beds and shredded privacy curtains, as if something had clawed them apart. Everything had been abandoned. But something felt wrong. Some beds were still neatly made, as if someone had just gotten up. An unopened medicine tray. A teacup coated in dust, but with a clean ring around the rim, as if someone had recently touched it. At the end of the hallway was a closed door. Room 213. I didn't know why, but my hand trembled when I touched the knob. I opened it. It looked like any other patient room, except for one thing. On the wall opposite the door was a large corkboard covered with dozens of black and white photographs. Photos of patients, but all of them had one thing in common. Each person wore nearly the same smile. Faint, tilted, not a smile of happiness, but something else. Something wrong. And then I saw it. One of them was my grandmother, not as an old woman, as a young nurse, wearing her uniform, standing behind a wheelchair, her hand resting on the shoulder of a frail old man who was smiling with a crooked, unnatural grin. Derek snapped pictures. I couldn't look away from my grandmother's eyes in the photo. It was like she knew I was there. "This place is not okay," Derek whispered. "I swear. Something's watching us from the wall." That moment, the flashlight died. We were swallowed by thick, crushing darkness. Then, slap, slap, slap. The sound of slippers right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But my hand felt icy cold. "Let's go," Derek hissed. "Something's moving in the hallway." We ran, but as we neared the window we'd come through, Derek stopped. He stared at the broken glass. "Do you see it?" he whispered. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. On the dusty pane was a tiny handprint, like a child's. Fresh, and beside it, written in the fog, left by breath. "Don't replace the photo." I stumbled backward, fell to the floor. We escaped, never looked back. I don't even remember how I got home. It all felt like a dream. That night I removed every photo of my grandmother from the house. But when I walked into the living room, they were back, sitting neatly on the mantelpiece. Same expression, same smile. I took one, threw it into the fireplace. I watched the photo curl and blacken. But there was no ash. It vanished. That night, the slippers didn't return. But something else did. A lullaby. A woman's voice, whispering the same melody I used to hear as a child. "Sleep tight, sleep well. The shadows fall deep." It was her voice, my grandmother's. But when I looked down toward the foot of the bed, there were wet footprints. Small, shaped exactly like her old fabric slippers. I thought I was going insane. The next morning, I called Father Michael. No answer. I drove to the church. They told me he had gone missing 3 days earlier. His car was still in the lot. No sign of him. I don't know what's happening anymore. But one thing I do know for sure. That smile in my grandmother's photo. It's not a smile. It's a signal. A door. And I just walked through it. I can't sleep anymore. The nights after I burned that photograph have become endless. There are no more slipper sounds, yes. But in their place came other sounds. Ones I can't easily describe. Like fingernails gently scratching wood. Like someone murmuring prayers in an ancient forgotten tongue. And sometimes, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I jolt awake with the piercing certainty. Someone was standing right next to my bed, staring down at me. I began to dream strange dreams. In them, I returned to this house, but not as I am now. I was a 5-year-old girl again, standing by the kitchen window, watching my grandmother talking to herself in the mirror. But the reflection didn't mimic her movements. It moved slower. Its eyes were more alive, more aware, as if it had its own consciousness. And then it smiled. The same twisted smile from the photograph. I woke before dawn, shirt soaked with cold sweat. I walked to the bathroom and flipped on the light. The old mirror above the sink trembled, just slightly, though there was no wind, no passing cars. I stood there, staring into my reflection. Then I saw her. Behind me, reflected in the mirror, was a woman in a faded grey nurse's uniform, her hair pinned up, standing still in the corner of the room. Not me, not a shadow, not anyone else. Just in the mirror. I spun around, nothing. But when I turned back to the mirror, she was closer now, standing directly behind me. Her eyes locked onto mine. Not angry, not sad, just knowing. As if she understood I was on the edge of discovering something I was never meant to know. The mirror cracked, a single jagged fracture, like lightning, cut through the center, even though I hadn't touched it. I ran from the room, clutching my phone, and called Derek. He picked up after 3 rings. His voice was hoarse, tired. I'm being watched, he whispered, since the night at the nursing home. I hear voices talking in my bathroom. Doors unlock themselves, and I have strange burn marks on my shoulders. I stayed silent, then said, "We need to go back. I need to know what really happened to my grandmother." Derek hesitated, then sighed. "If you find the name Marjorie Grant, call me. That name came up in old records at the home. I found it tucked behind a torn painting in room 213. Marjorie Grant." I headed straight to the city library. In the 1983 archives, I found a death report. Patient Marjorie Grant, 73 years old, disappeared from Fremont, Oak Haven on the 09-14-1983. Body never recovered. Note, last caregiver was Nurse Evelyn H. My heart stopped. My grandmother's name, beside a woman who vanished without a trace. That night, I climbed to the attic. A place I hadn't entered since moving in. At the top of the narrow stairs, a rotted wooden door gave way with a gentle push. Inside the dust-choked space, I found a dark wooden trunk, rusted at the lock but left unlatched. Inside, an old leather-bound journal, its cover cracked, titled E. Holloway's Soul Transition Notes. A wooden doll, face painted pale white, with no eyes and no mouth. And another photograph of my grandmother, standing next to a silver-haired woman in a hospital gown. That woman was Marjorie Grant. I opened the journal with trembling hands. The handwriting was erratic, mixed with Latin and symbols I couldn't decipher. But some English passages were still clear. The mirror is a gateway. The smile is the mark. When a soul refuses to move on, it anchors itself to an image. Burning the photo only cuts the rope. It doesn't break the anchor. Marjorie resisted the rite. She refused the soul transition. Evelyn failed. The link bounced back. I've begun hearing the slippers at night. I think I'm losing control. Marjorie is smiling in the photo. I'm afraid to look in the mirror. I shut the book, heart pounding. It felt like something in the attic shadows was holding its breath, waiting for me to uncover the final truth. I left the trunk behind and returned to my room. The mirror on the wall had shattered into several jagged pieces. On the floor, written in blood, were the words, "Don't look into her eyes." I had no idea where the message came from. I wasn't bleeding. There was no one else in the house. But I knew, without a doubt, if I looked into her eyes tonight, something would wake up, and I wasn't sure I'd survive if it did. I stayed awake the entire night. I sat with my back against the wall, holding my grandmother's notebook, her collection of soul transfer rituals that she had once written, once practiced, and once failed. Wind slipped through the second-floor window, making the curtains sway like beckoning hands. Outside, a light rain fell, but inside, a storm was brewing. I stared toward the shattered mirror, the fragments catching the dim glow of the bedside lamp. For a split second, I thought I saw an eye open in one of the shards, wide, unblinking, as if it had just awakened from years of slumber. I tried not to look for too long. Father Michael's voice echoed in my head like a warning. This thing doesn't want to be let go. And now I understood. It wasn't just a lonely spirit. It was an entire system, a network of trapped souls, dragged down by a ritual that had been warped, twisted by the one I used to call Grandma. My phone buzzed. It was Derek. His voice was panicked. I need to see you, now. I can't stay here anymore. I told him to come over, though I felt uneasy. But deep down, I needed someone else to witness this, in case the night left no way out. When Derek arrived, I barely recognized him. He was pale, eyes sunken with dark circles, one hand bandaged, and his shirt collar pulled aside to reveal long, purple-red scratch marks running from behind his eave down to his shoulder. Uneven, not human, more like broken fingernails. I dreamed of your grandmother, he said, collapsing onto the sofa. She was standing in my bathroom, staring into the mirror, but I didn't see her reflection. I saw myself, smiling, just like that smile in the photo. And then I woke up with these marks on me. I told him everything. The notebook, Marjorie Grant, the incantation to anchor a soul through a photo. Derek stared at me, confused. You think her spirit never left? I nodded. And worse, she's not the only one still trapped. We decided to attempt one of the rituals from the notebook, the final reflection rite, written on the last page in shaky handwriting. According to the notes, the ritual could force a soul out of its reflective host, but only if its gaze is completely obscured. Meaning, don't look it in the eyes through the mirror. I covered every mirror in the house with white cloths, leaving only one large mirror exposed in the center of the living room. We traced the symbols from the notebook onto its surface with white chalk. A circle enclosing a handprint and 3 strange runes that looked like ancient script. Then, exactly at 3:17 a.m., the hour when everything always happens, we began. I read the incantation. Nothing happened. The second time, wind started blowing inside the house, even though all the windows were sealed shut. The third time, the lights went out, and I heard whispering, not from one voice, but from many. A ghostly choir behind the mirror. I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes shut and continued chanting. Derek held a candle for light, and he was the first to see it. You have to see this. His voice was hoarse, terrified. I opened my eyes and glanced at the mirror. There was no reflection, only a dark hallway stretching into infinity, and someone walking toward us. A woman in a nurse's uniform, hair pinned up, face pale as chalk, holding a picture frame in her hands. I almost collapsed. That photo was me. Not her, me, smiling. The figure raised the frame toward the mirror, and then touched the surface from the inside. The glass quivered. "Cover it!" I screamed. "Cover it now!" Derek, shaking, threw the white cloth over it. The mirror instantly stopped trembling. The hallway disappeared. The figure was gone. I gasped, clutching the notebook. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice came through. "You shouldn't have covered the mirror, Emily." I froze. It was my grandmother's voice. No mistake. Even though she'd been dead for over a year. She continued, sweet yet cold. "You did the ritual wrong. You opened the door, But you didn't close it. The line went dead. I turned to Derek. He was clutching his head, blood dripping from his nose. I rushed to him, pulling his hands away, and froze in horror. His eyes had changed color. The irises were dark, almost completely black. He whispered, "She's looking at me from behind." I turned around. No one there. But when I glanced at the wall clock, the second hand had stopped, right at 3:17. And I knew the ritual wasn't over. She hadn't left. And now, she was no longer trapped in the mirror. Story 3. Trapped in a funeral loop. I started noticing it on a gloomy Monday morning when the sky was still foggy and the sun hidden behind a thick blanket of gray clouds. Like every other day, I drove to the old bookstore where I work as a manager in the small town of Eddington, Vermont. It's a quiet town, not too crowded, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else. And perhaps because of that very stillness, I noticed something was terribly wrong. On the main road leading into town, I always passed by an old church. Gothic architecture, stained glass windows faded by time. Every morning, I would drive right past it. But that morning, there was a hearse parked in front of the gate. I barely glanced at it, assuming someone in town had passed away. It happens, though not often. But the next morning, another hearse, same spot. This time I looked closer. People in black were entering the church, and the bell tolled mournfully. Another funeral. Day 3. Another funeral. Day 4. The same. I started to feel a chill in my spine. There was no way that many people could be dying in a week. This town only has around 2,000 residents, mostly elderly, yes, but not that many. A creeping sense of unease grew in my chest. On Thursday morning, I decided to stop the car. On the church steps, I saw a memorial photo placed inside a glass frame at the entrance. An elderly man with silver hair. His face looked familiar. I squinted. Yes, he was a regular at my bookstore. His name was Matthew Gleason. I remembered him because he always bought old horror novels, especially Stephen King. I stood frozen, staring at the photo. This couldn't be right. Matthew had been in my store just 3 days ago, asking me to order some rare books. I climbed a few steps to get a closer look, but just then, the church door creaked open, and a tall man in black stepped out. His face was expressionless, his eyes dark, hollow, like they had no pupils. I instinctively backed away. He didn't speak, just stared at me, then slammed the door shut. I left quickly, a weight of dread pressing down on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and searched for news on any recent funerals in Eddington. Nothing. Not a single article mentioning Matthew Gleason or anyone else who had died that week. No obituaries, no funeral announcements. It was like none of it had ever happened. On Friday morning, I told myself I wouldn't pass by the church again, but something pulled me back. This time, I stopped the car and got out. The funeral was still happening. I walked toward the photo and froze. It was Sarah, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next to mine. A kind soul who always gave me pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving. But I had just spoken to her the evening before, while she watered her plants on the porch. I turned and ran to my car, my heart pounding. Cold sweat clung to my forehead. I told Mark, my only close friend in town. He's an amateur journalist who writes for the local paper. He looked at me like I was hallucinating, but after I insisted, We agreed to go to the church together on Saturday morning to see for ourselves. That morning, we stood in silence outside the church, feeling like fools. The funeral was still happening. The memorial photo showed a young man. Mark squinted, then whispered, "That's Danny, my brother-in-law. He just texted me yesterday." I looked at him. His face had gone pale. We were about to step into the church when, once again, the door creaked open. The same man in black appeared, but this time, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was warped, unnatural, stretching to his ears, as if it had been carved into his face with hooks. I grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him away. We didn't speak until we were back at the bookstore. Mark turned on his laptop and checked Danny's social media. No activity since last night. "I'm going to his house, Pa," Mark said. "You don't have to come?" I nodded, but something in me stayed uneasy. That night, I dreamed of the church, but it wasn't the same church anymore. Inside was pitch black, the pews completely empty. On the altar, dozens of framed photographs. I walked closer one by one. My name was on one of them. I woke up drenched in sweat. My phone rang. It was Mark. I went to Danny's house. They said he left early this morning and hasn't come back. But something's weird. "What?" I asked. His mom said someone came to pick him up, dressed in black, said it was a funeral for a relative. But Danny doesn't have any relatives who passed recently. I was silent. Then I asked, "Did the man smile?" Mark replied, "No, but his eyes, they were black, like two deep holes." Sunday morning, I didn't sleep. I walked to the church before sunrise. No hearse, no people. The church doors were shut tight, but I knew someone was inside. I pressed my face against the glass. A dark figure stood at the altar, back turned toward me. In his hands was a photo frame. I couldn't see clearly, but something moved on the surface. It looked like a face. My face. Smiling. I didn't go near the church for 3 days after that. Every morning, I took a longer route, avoiding the street where the old chapel sat like a scar on the town's skin. But the truth was, I still watched it, even if only through the car window, from a distance, and nothing changed. Every day, there was still a funeral, still the same sleek black hearse parked at the gate, still the same line of mourners in black, walking in with hollow eyes, as if all feeling had been drained from them. Still a new face in the photo frame on the steps. And I began recognizing more and more of them. I started keeping notes, secretly snapping pictures of the portraits with my phone, then researching them at home. Each face had its own story. The neighbor, the shopkeeper, even the old man who used to walk his dog in the park. None of them were officially declared dead. No obituaries, no news. But they never showed up again. Stranger still, when I looked them up online, many of their records had vanished, like they'd never existed at all. And then Mark disappeared. I called him all Tuesday night, but it just rang and rang. The next morning, I drove to his apartment on the south side of town. The door was unlocked. The lights were still on. There were no signs of a struggle or robbery. Everything was perfectly intact, except for one thing. A single photo frame on the dining table. It was Mark's memorial photo, but not a printed image. It was a real photograph, one of us from a fishing trip. The photo had been cut in half, with only Mark's face framed in black, set against a white background. Below it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Remember, he once existed." I broke down. I screamed his name, but only echoes answered. And then I realized I couldn't keep avoiding the truth. The next morning, I went back to the church. I arrived early, before any funerals began. The main gate was open. I stepped inside, and a wave of cold air rushed out like it came from a deep crypt. The place was empty, not a single soul. I walked quietly toward the altar, where the photos were usually displayed during services, and I saw it. Dozens of photo frames lined up in rows, each one covered with a black cloth. My hands trembled as I pulled them back, one by one, each familiar face hitting me like a blade to the memory. Sarah, Mr. Matthew, Danny, and finally, Mark. There was one frame left uncovered. I hesitated, then slowly turned it over. It was me. I was staring at myself, in a photo I had never taken. Pale face, lifeless eyes, and behind me, a man in black. He stood silently behind me, one hand resting on my shoulder. I screamed and threw the frame to the ground. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the darkened space. Suddenly, the chandelier above began to flicker. A distorted hymn blared from the old speakers. A voice warped like it was playing through an ancient, damaged tape. I turned and ran, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. I didn't go home. I went to the bookstore, the only place I still felt safe. The bell creaked as I stepped inside. The air was thick, like something had just crawled up from underground. I sat behind the counter, trying to steady my breath. And that's when I realized someone had entered the shop. I heard footsteps, light, very light, but steady. I jumped up, stepped out from behind the shelves. There she was. A girl stood in the middle of the store. Long black hair, pale skin. She wore a faded white dress like an old school uniform. Her eyes were blank as she stared at me. "Are you the owner?" she asked, voice whispering like dry leaves in wind. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She handed me a photo. "Is this real?" I took it. A group of people stood in front of the church. In the center was me. But in the photo, I was lying in a coffin. My face was carefully made up, hands folded neatly over my chest. And behind the coffin, dozens of familiar faces, all the people who had disappeared. I looked up. She was gone. No door had opened, no sound, as if she'd never been there. I decided to post everything on an online forum for the paranormal, somewhere people wouldn't immediately assume I was insane. I used an anonymous account and made the post just after midnight. A few minutes later, someone responded. Only one line. "You've seen too much." I typed back. "Who are you? What is this?" No reply. As I began to write more, my computer screen went black, then flickered back on. Only one window was open. An image of the church, not a photo. A hand-drawn sketch, rough, in dark ink like dried blood. My name was on it, carved into a headstone. I didn't sleep that night. I grabbed my phone, packed a few essentials, and left my house. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. But when I reached the main road, I saw it, a funeral procession, moving slowly, silently. None of the cars had headlights on, no horns, no drivers. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. The last car stopped, its door opened, no one inside, except a single photo frame placed in the center. It was me, and this time, I was smiling. I left the town of Eddington at dawn the next morning. No luggage, no goodbye, not even a locked front door. I just needed to leave, as far away as possible. It felt like if I stayed even one more hour, I'd never have the chance to leave again. Everything in that town seemed to be slipping out of reality, falling into a fog dimension I no longer had control over. I drove along Interstate 89 through cold lands draped in morning mist. Only when the pale sunlight finally hit my windshield did I pull into a roadside gas station. It sat at the edge of Bar, a town not even 2 hours from Eddington. Yet it felt like another world entirely. I stepped into the adjacent diner, ordered a cup of hot coffee, and took a seat in the far corner. In my hand was the photograph, the one given to me by the mysterious girl. I stared at my own face inside a coffin. I didn't know if it was a warning or a prophecy. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the bottom corner of the photo, the lower left, there was a smudged mark. I leaned in closer. A symbol, an eye, slashed through with 3 diagonal cuts. Rough, as if drawn with the last drops of a dying pen. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing. It wasn't random. I decided to visit the local library. I needed to learn more about that church, its history, the deaths, and most of all, the man in black. I found an elderly librarian named Evelyn, gentle and seemingly eager to help. But when I asked about the Church of St. Augustine in Eddington, she froze, hesitation flashing behind her eyes. That church was shut down in 1989, she said, voice lowering. I frowned. Are you sure? I was there just last week. Funerals are held there daily. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Impossible. The diocese ordered most of it dismantled after a ritual accident. A priest disappeared during Mass. No one ever found him. After that, locals started vanishing one by one. A chill ran down my spine. Are there any records of the missing people? She led me into the archive room, where old town files and newspaper clippings were stored. We found a 1990 article. 13 local residents vanished near St. Augustine Church. Several names on the list caught in my throat. Gleason, Mark Evans, Sarah Culver. No, these were names I'd seen on memorial cards. But if they disappeared more than 30 years ago, then who had come into my bookstore? Who spoke to me? Who brought me pumpkin pie last fall? Or had I been living among people who no longer existed? Leaving the library, I took copies of the disappearance files with me. I drove to the Bar police station, hoping for more answers. A young officer named Lyle received me. When I showed him the list of names and told him about their recent appearances, he fell silent for a long time. Eventually, he pulled open a drawer and retrieved a dusty old folder. This is why I've never set foot in Eddington, Lyle said. My father was the police chief there. He vanished in 1988, a few months before the mass disappearances. My mom said he started having dreams about his own funeral and a man in a black robe standing next to the coffin. I said nothing. Everything I'd once tried to deny was slowly coming back for me. I asked him about the symbol, the crossed out eye. He paused, then pulled a burned, brittle parchment from another drawer. The same symbol, drawn larger, clearer. My dad wrote that it was tied to an old ritual, Lyle explained. They called it the repeating funeral. According to European folklore, it was meant to trap a soul in the mortal realm. A funeral held every day to ensure the spirit never finds peace. And if someone witnesses too many of these funerals, their name begins to appear in the rite. That night, I checked into a cheap roadside motel. But I couldn't sleep. I set alarms every hour. just to prove to myself I was still alive. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the alarm didn't go off. I jolted awake, scanning the pitch-dark room. The window was wide open, curtains fluttered in the wind. And in the center of the room stood a photo frame. No one could have come in. The door was locked from the inside, but the frame was there, set neatly like it had always belonged. I walked toward it. Inside the frame was a photo of me, but not me from the past, me from tonight. The scar on my forehead, the shirt I was wearing, all of it was exact. Only one thing was different. In the picture, I was lying inside a coffin, and beneath it, in smeared handwriting, "It's your turn." I left the motel room just as the first light crept over the horizon. I didn't take the photo with me. I left it on the nightstand like remnant of a nightmare I hadn't yet shaken off. But deep down, I knew the nightmare had already stepped out of fractured sleep and begun threading itself into my waking life. With every funeral bell, every distorted smile from the man in black, every name fading from the memory of those who once knew them, it was all becoming real. I drove back to Eddington. This time, there was no hesitation, no detours through side streets like before. I drove straight to the heart of town and stopped in front of St. Augustine's Church, the place where everything began. The iron gate stood ajar as if beckoning me inside. The black paint peeled off in patches, revealing deep red rust underneath, like dried blood on an old wound. No mourners, no hearse, no one around, but I knew it was still there. That place where the photos appeared and changed daily, like a death prophecy yet to be fulfilled. I pushed the door open. The air inside was thick and frigid. The scent of half-melted candles, rotting wood and something else. The damp iron tang of long-buried death. The nave was silent. The stained glass windows fogged with time, their dim light casting ghostly shadows. I walked the aisle between the wooden pews. The photo on the altar was no longer mine. It was an empty frame, no picture, no name, just a sheet of glass reflecting my own face, pale and trembling. I turned to leave, and then I heard it, a soft scratching sound from below, like fingernails on stone, sharp, repetitive. I knelt down, ear to the floor. The sound became clearer, not just one, many, as if something, no, several somethings, were crawling beneath me. I sprang to my feet and backed away. My eyes fell on something I hadn't noticed before. A worn rug in front of the pulpit, its edges hand-stitched. I knelt, lifted it. A stone hatch, no lock, just a rusted handle. I took a deep breath and pulled it open. The stench hit me like a wave. I gagged, nearly vomited. But still, I climbed down, flashlight trembling in my hand. The crypt beneath the church wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a burial chamber. It was a corridor, long and narrow. The stone walls wet and seeping. The bricks exhaling cold breaths. I moved slowly, sweeping my light across the alcoves. Each niche looked like a resting place for bones. But there were no bones, only photo frames. Each one, every single one. Each frame held a human face. All of them familiar. All of them the missing. I ventured deeper. The sound of scratching grew louder. I turned into a side tunnel and my flashlight caught a figure, a woman. She sat hunched in the corner, hair falling over her face, arms wrapped around her knees. I called out softly. No response. I approached and gasped. It was the girl from the bookstore, the one who'd handed me the funeral photo. "What are you doing here?" I stammered. She looked up. Her eyes were clouded over, as if they hadn't seen daylight in years. "I never left," she whispered, "because I was never buried." I backed away. She kept speaking, her voice bleeding like a wound. "You think these are funerals for the dead? No, these are rites for the forgotten. For every person no one remembers. They're drawn into the repeating funeral. No one cries for them. No names carved into stone. No memories left behind. And when they vanish, it becomes the next person's turn." I couldn't speak. Then finally, I asked, "Why me?" She looked at me, her gaze hollow. "Because you saw, and because no one remembers you anymore." I bolted. The tunnels twisted like a maze. Each step echoed like I was being chased by hundreds of crawling feet just behind me. Finally, I saw a heavy oak door, bound by iron chains. I pushed. It wouldn't budge. On the other side of the door, I heard a voice, a man's voice, familiar. It was Mark. "Run," he whispered. "Don't let him learn your name." I backed away. Then, click, a sound behind me. I turned, the man in black. He stood in the middle of the corridor, motionless, breathless, blinkless, just standing there. His eyes were pits, his face pale as ash, and that smile ripped across his cheeks like it was carved into him. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only watch. As he walked toward me, he reached out, holding a photo frame. I looked. It wasn't me. It was Evelyn, the librarian. I exhaled in shock, and everything went black. When I woke, I was lying on the church porch. Night had fallen. No one was around. No funerals, no photos. But in my hand was an old picture of Evelyn, the only woman who had believed me, now caught in the same loop. I cried, and I knew if I didn't act, more would follow. I couldn't save them all, but maybe, just maybe, I could break something. Story 4. The Corpse That Refused to be Buried. I still remember clearly the day Arthur Lane's body was first laid to rest. It was a gloomy October afternoon in the town of Greenville, deep in the state of Maine, where chilling legends always seemed to lurk beneath the shadows of the ancient woods. Greenville was a small, quiet town. People were used to peace and routine. But sometimes, that very stillness served as a veil for something far more terrifying. In life, Arthur Lane had been a strange and silent man. He lived alone in a worn-down wooden cabin on the edge of Fairview Cemetery. He had once worked as a grave digger there, but age and failing health forced him into early retirement. During his final years, he became almost completely isolated from the town. No one really saw him leave his cabin anymore. One morning in late September, Arthur was found dead, lying on his old bed. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide open in horror, staring blankly at the ceiling. The town doctor found no visible injuries, just a sudden heart attack. But what disturbed everyone was the look of sheer terror frozen on his face, as if he had seen something truly horrifying in his final moments. The funeral was small and somber. Besides Reverend Robert and a few townsfolk, I was there. James Miller, caretaker of Fairview Cemetery. That afternoon, the sky was thick with gray clouds, casting a heavy chill in the air. As Arthur's coffin was slowly lowered into the ground, a sudden gust of wind swept through, carrying a strange rustling sound from the woods, like a long, sorrowful sigh. That first night after the burial was uneasy. I lay in bed, unable to stop thinking about Arthur's mysterious death. Just before dawn, a frantic knocking jolted me awake. I rushed to the door to find Tom Wallace, the town sheriff, pale and out of breath. "James, you need to get to the cemetery, now. Something's wrong." When I arrived at Fairview, what I saw nearly made my heart stop. Arthur's freshly covered grave had been torn open. Dirt scattered everywhere. The coffin lay on its side, cracked open. And the most horrifying thing, Arthur Lane's body was lying neatly beside the grave, eyes closed, limbs scratched and scraped, as if he had clawed his way up from the earth himself. News spread through Greenville like wildfire. Panic gripped the town. People whispered theories. Some said Arthur's soul hadn't moved on, that he was still clinging to this world. We decided to bury him again. This time, the coffin was reinforced, and the grave was filled in deeper and packed more firmly. 2 police officers, Brian and Ethan, were assigned to guard the cemetery overnight. But as the sun rose the next morning, the horror repeated itself. Arthur Lane's body was once again lying outside the grave, eyes closed, dirt under his fingernails, the grave freshly torn open. Brian and Ethan trembled as they tried to explain. "We were there all night. No one came near the grave. It dug itself out." Greenville sank deeper into fear. Some demanded Arthur's body be cremated to put him to rest for good. But Reverend Robert strongly opposed the idea. In the end, a bold decision was made. Arthur Lane would be buried a 3rd time, in a steel coffin, sealed shut and wrapped in heavy chains. Everyone believed this would be the last time. That night I couldn't sleep. Strange noises outside my window kept me on edge. Footsteps, whispers, soft scratching on the glass. At dawn, my phone rang. It was Sheriff Tom, his voice shaking. "James, it's happened again. Hurry." When I arrived, I could hardly breathe. The steel coffin was still in the ground, undamaged, but somehow Arthur's body was lying outside again. The scratches on his arms and legs were deeper this time, more violent, like he had fought harder to escape. Witnesses began to whisper darker things now, that some evil force was preventing Arthur from resting. The elders spoke of an old curse tied to Fairview Cemetery, but no one remembered the full story. As for me, a freezing dread crept into my bones. Was Arthur Lane trying to warn us? Or was he fleeing from something even worse than death? And in that moment, I realized something truly horrifying. The story of the corpse that refused to stay buried was only the beginning. Something ancient, cruel, and unspeakably dark was waking in Greenville. And I, James Miller, was going to be the first to face the nightmare. In the days that followed, the town of Greenville sank into a state of overwhelming unease. People began to avoid Fairview Cemetery altogether. Even the bravest no longer dared to step outside after dark. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere settled over the small town like a suffocating fog. As for me, James Miller, a mix of paralyzing fear and insatiable curiosity gnawed at my mind. I hadn't had a peaceful night's sleep since the horrific events began. My thoughts were haunted by the image of Arthur Lane's corpse lying still beside his disturbed grave. His desperate attempts to escape the earth growing more violent and terrifying each time. That afternoon, I made the decision to visit Arthur's old cabin, hoping to find any clue that might explain the terrifying phenomena. If Arthur truly wanted to tell us something, I thought, Perhaps the answer lay within the decrepit wooden house where he once lived. Arthur's house sat quietly on the outskirts of town, right by the edge of the forest, shrouded in a chilling stillness. The windows were caked with grime, the paint was peeling, and weeds had overtaken the path to the front door. The moment I stepped inside, a strange, unnatural cold crept into my skin. The interior was pitch dark, save for faint, dying light trickling in through narrow cracks. I groped for the light switch, but it was clear the electricity had long been cut. I turned on my flashlight and scanned the living room. The furniture was old and scattered. Papers and moldy newspapers lay strewn about. The air was thick with the smell of rot and mildew. Suddenly, my flashlight landed on the far corner of the room. My breath caught in my throat. A large wooden wardrobe stood there, oddly crooked, almost like someone had intentionally moved it to hide something behind it. My heart began to pound as I stepped closer and pushed the cabinet aside with all my strength. Behind it was a small hidden door, secured by a rusted brass padlock. Something in my gut told me I had to see what was inside. I grabbed a nearby metal rod and forced the lock open. With a harsh screech, the door creaked ajar. A narrow staircase descended into total darkness. I hesitated. The cold emanating from the basement felt alive, like it was trying to hold me back. But my curiosity pushed me forward. One cautious step at a time, I made my way down, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The basement was small and bone-chillingly cold. I nearly stumbled when I saw the walls, covered in strange symbols, crudely drawn but deeply unsettling. In the center of the floor was a large circle painted in dried crimson, filled with cryptic markings. A small altar stood in the middle of it, holding an old photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. As I knelt down to examine the symbols, a loud thud echoed from above, like someone had just stepped inside the house. I froze, heart pounding, barely breathing. I tiptoed back toward the stairs, ears straining for any sound. Heavy footsteps creaked across the wooden floor, then stopped. I poked my head out of the basement, scanning the living room. No one. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind burst through the front door, flinging it wide open. Pale twilight poured in. I bolted outside, gasping for breath. That's when I saw it. A tall, dark figure stood at the edge of the forest watching me. It didn't move. It just stood there, waiting. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. The figure slowly stepped back into the trees and vanished from sight. I stood there for a long moment, paralyzed with confusion and fear, before finally fleeing the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. The grotesque images from the basement clung to my mind. Who was the woman in the photograph? Why had Arthur hidden something so terrifying? And who, what, was the figure in the forest? Around 3 a.m., just as I began to drift off, the phone rang. The sharp, urgent ringing pierced the silence like an alarm. I answered and heard Sheriff Tom Wallace's panicked voice on the line. "James, get down here now. Ethan's missing. He was on duty at the cemetery tonight." A chill gripped my entire body. Without another word, I jumped in my car and sped to Fairview Cemetery. When I arrived, the entire police unit had gathered. Everyone stood in silence around Arthur Lane's grave, now dug up for the 4th time. But this time, the body was gone. Arthur Lane had vanished completely. Ethan's flashlight lay abandoned in the cold dirt nearby, and next to it, a trail of blood led deep into the forest beyond the cemetery. At that moment, we all understood something terrifying. Greenville wasn't just dealing with a corpse that refused to stay buried. We were being manipulated by something far darker. And somehow, I, James Miller, had become part of it. The scene before me nearly drained all the strength from my body. My legs buckled, and my heart pounded violently, as if trying to burst from my chest. Ethan had vanished. Arthur Lane's corpse was gone. The blood trail leading from the cemetery into the dark, ancient forest only deepened the terror that gripped everyone present. Tom Wallace, the sheriff, stood beside me. In his eyes now wasn't just worry. It was complete helplessness in the face of inexplicable horror. Wallace immediately ordered a search party to find Ethan. Though we all knew that the chances of finding him alive were heartbreakingly slim. "I'm going with you," I said firmly, even as my insides trembled. Somehow, I felt responsible for uncovering the truth. The darkness looming over Greenville wouldn't stop. Not unless we stopped running and started fighting back. Alongside the officers, I followed the trail of blood into the depths of the forest. The deeper we went, the denser the woods became. The thick canopy swallowed the moonlight, and our flashlights barely illuminated the path ahead. Each footstep on dry leaves echoed like whispers. Whispers of unseen spirits watching us from the shadows. After a long, silent march, the search party came to a halt in a small clearing. In the center stood a massive ancient tree, its bark etched with bizarre carvings, like a forgotten language from an age long gone. I stepped closer. My heart stopped. The symbols were identical to the ones I had seen in the hidden basement beneath Arthur Lane's house. Before I could gather my thoughts, a young officer named Jeremy let out a terrified scream from behind the tree. We all rushed over, flashlights casting frantic beams, revealing what had horrified him so deeply. Ethan's body hung from a low branch. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a stare of terror. As if in death, he had seen something far more dreadful than dying itself. His limbs were scraped and caked with dirt, just like Arthur Lane after his grave digging. But the most horrifying part, Ethan's mouth was stuffed with leaves and soil, as if the killer wanted to silence a truth too terrifying to speak. Wallace stood in stunned silence. So did the rest of us. Who had done this? And why torment Ethan in such a grotesque way? Just as our fear reached its peak, the sound of rapid footsteps erupted from the darkness beyond the trees. Leaves rustled violently. I spun around and shouted, "Who's there? Stop right now!" No answer. Wallace signaled the group to spread out and search, but whatever had just fled was already gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving only the wind whispering through the trees, cold, hollow, and cruel. When we returned from the forest, not a single person dared speak. Faces were pale and numb with horror. Back home, I was still shaken. And when I opened my door, I noticed something had been slit through the gap beneath it, a crumpled, yellowing piece of paper. On it, in jagged, haunting letters, was a warning. "James Miller, you should stop digging. Greenville will pay the price." My breath caught. I scanned the empty street outside, but there was no one in sight. Once again I felt it, that invisible gaze. Something watching me, always watching. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I decided to find Pastor Robert, the man who had so vehemently opposed Arthur Lane's cremation. His small church in the center of town, normally quiet and peaceful. now seemed cloaked in an ominous stillness. He sat silently in the chapel, his face aged and worn as I entered. "Pastor, I need to know the truth," I said with all the steadiness I could muster. He looked up, his weary eyes filled with hesitation. After a long pause, he finally exhaled and spoke in a low voice. "Some truths, James, are better left unknown." I stepped closer, locked eyes with him. "But Greenville is already bleeding. Ethan is dead. Do you understand what that means? Arthur Lane won't rest because he knew something. Please, tell me the truth." He hesitated, but eventually, with a sigh, full of dread, he spoke. "Very well, James. The truth is, Arthur Lane wasn't just an ordinary man. He was once involved with an ancient cult, one that believed it could resurrect the dead by awakening a dark entity. I believe it was Arthur's actions that started this. And now that evil has awakened." I stood frozen. His words echoed through my mind like a bell tolling the start of an unending nightmare. At that exact moment, my phone rang. It was Sheriff Wallace, his voice frantic on the other end. "James, come to Fairview Cemetery. Arthur Lane, he's come back." My heart plummeted into an abyss. The darkness that had consumed Greenville now revealed its true face. A face more monstrous and merciless than anything we could have imagined. And I knew, without a doubt, this nightmare was far from over. It was just beginning. I raced toward Fairview Cemetery, my heart pounding like it was about to burst. Tom Wallace's words echoed over and over in my mind, drowning me in dread. Arthur Lane. He's come back. The sky above Greenville was darker than usual. Thick black clouds swirling like an omen. When I arrived, the police were already there, gathered around an old grave, faces tense and pale with fear. Wallace rushed to me, his expression drained of all color, his voice trembling. "James, this time it's different. He's not lying still anymore." I stepped closer to the grave, and what I saw froze my blood. Arthur Lane was standing upright inside the deep pit. His body was caked in mud, long scratches marked his arms, and his face was twisted in something beyond horror. His eyes, wide open and milky white, were those of a corpse. And yet he stood firm, as if held up by some unseen, unnatural force. The scene stunned everyone into silence. One of the younger officers dropped his gun in fright. The clatter rang out like a gunshot through the heavy stillness. "Back away!" Wallace shouted, signaling everyone to keep their distance. But right then, Arthur abruptly raised his head and let out a long, guttural moan. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was the sound of something struggling to escape invisible torment. Arthur began to climb out of the grave, his movements warped and jerky, like a puppet being yanked by tangled strings. Every step he took felt wrong, impossible. I backed away, trying to remain calm, my eyes locked on his twisted frame as he moved closer. Wallace raised his gun and yelled, "Stop right there, Arthur!" But Arthur didn't respond. Or maybe he wasn't Arthur anymore. He stopped inches from Wallace, his pale face staring directly into his soul. Then a voice, gravelly, broken, escaped his mouth. It was distorted, chilling. "You woke it. Now you will all pay the price." And with that, Arthur collapsed, lifeless, as if whatever had been inside him had fled. The graveyard fell silent once again, save for the heavy, shuddering breaths of everyone around. Later that day, after Arthur's body was returned to the morgue, Wallace and I sat facing each other in his cramped office. Neither of us spoke for a while. Only the ticking of the old wall clock marked the seconds, like a countdown. Finally, Wallace broke the silence, his voice low. "James, what did you find in Arthur's house?" I took a deep breath and told him everything about the hidden basement, the strange symbols, the altar, and the photo of a woman I didn't recognize. Wallace went still, his eyes narrowing in thought. "We need to find out who that woman is. She could be the key to all of this." We decided to return to Arthur's cabin. This time, Reverend Robert joined us. He seemed to know more than he let on, but there was fear in his eyes too. When we stepped inside the cabin again, the air felt even heavier than before. Every breath formed thick white mist in the freezing air. We went straight to the hidden basement, where the ancient symbols still haunted my dreams. Reverend Robert approached the altar, staring at the photograph. His hands began to tremble. "This is Emily Ross," he whispered. "She went missing over 30 years ago. People said she left Greenville, but no one ever found out what really happened to her." Wallace frowned. "What did Arthur have to do with Emily?" Robert sighed. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray. Arthur and Emily were involved, but she disappeared right around the time Arthur began experimenting with ancient rituals to bring the dead back. I believe he sacrificed her to awaken the thing he was trying to reach. His words hit me like a hammer. At that moment, a cold wind roared through the basement. The floor trembled violently. Our flashlights flickered, then cut out completely. In the pitch darkness, a whisper echoed right next to my ear. "Help me, James. It won't stop. It never stops." My heart nearly stopped. It was Ethan's voice. Ethan, who had died in the forest. When the lights returned, there was no one beside me. Only Wallace and Reverend Robert, both staring at me in horror. We fled the house immediately, but this time, we all knew. The curse had grown beyond Greenville's control. It wasn't just about Arthur or Emily. It included Ethan, and maybe all of us. As I stepped outside and looked up at the storm-choked sky, a crushing weight settled in my chest. The battle was only beginning, and none of us was safe anymore. A curse from the past was awakening, ready to drag us all into its deepest hell. Story 5. The one erased from memory. I opened my eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling with a strange sense of unease. Something felt as though it had just slipped from my mind, leaving behind an empty void that filled me with confusion. The air in my room felt colder than usual this morning. The faint rays of light filtering through the curtains made everything feel gloomier, lonelier than ever before. I sat up, scanning the room carefully. Everything appeared untouched, exactly as it had been yesterday. Yet for some reason, my heart twisted anxiously. Picking up my phone to check the time, I froze. Strangely enough, the screen was utterly empty, no notifications at all, as though I'd ceased to exist overnight. I pulled on a light jacket, slowly making my way downstairs, trying to dispel the creeping anxiety inside me. The familiar sizzling sound of eggs frying drifted up from the kitchen below, and the faint scent calmed me slightly. A relieved smile crossed my lips as I convinced myself it was all in my imagination. "Good morning," I greeted as usual, yet only silence answered me. Stepping hesitantly into the kitchen, I saw Mom still busy frying eggs, Dad reading the newspaper at the breakfast table, and my younger brother Lucas absorbed in his phone. No one seemed to notice I was even there. "Morning, everyone," I tried again, my voice trembling slightly. Mom finally glanced up, confusion and suspicion clear on her face. Who are you looking for, young lady?" Her words paralyzed me. I stared at her, sure this was some cruel joke. "Come on, Mom. It's me, Madison." Dad lowered the newspaper, stood up, and approached me warily. "Hey, kid, when did you get into our house? Who are you? And how did you even get in here?" "It's Madison, your daughter. Stop playing around. This isn't funny." Panic surged inside me as I glanced at Lucas, who paid me no attention, as though I'd never existed. Desperately, I bolted back to the living room, opening drawers in search of my personal papers. But everything I pulled out bore no trace of me. No birth certificate, no family register, not even photos. Pictures I'd always been part of now showed only 3 people. It was as though I'd never existed in this world. The panic became overwhelming. I dashed outside and sprinted over to Aunt Susan's house next door. She had always adored me. Surely she'd help me make sense of this insanity. The door swung open, and Aunt Susan stared at me for what felt like an eternity before finally asking, in a voice filled with unfamiliarity, "Young lady, is there something you need? Why do you look so terrified?" I stumbled back, shaking my head wildly. "This can't be happening. Don't you recognize me, Aunt Susan? It's me, Madison." Her eyebrows furrowed, suspicion flickering in her eyes, and she slowly shook her head. "You're mistaken. No one named Madison lives here." Terrified, I ran into the street, desperately calling out to neighbors I had known my whole life. But they all looked at me with indifferent, cold eyes. Every step weighed heavier as I realized, with chilling clarity, that I had been erased from everyone's memory. In a desperate hope, I raced to school, praying someone there would remember. But once again, disappointment and pain awaited. Friends, teachers, everyone stared at me like a stranger who'd appeared from nowhere, repeatedly asking me, "Are you sure you're not dreaming?" I collapsed onto a nearby park bench, tears streaming down my face. Was the world around me disappearing, or was I the one erased from existence? Suddenly, I felt someone sit down beside me. Turning abruptly, I saw a man dressed in a long coat, his hat nearly concealing his face. Fearfully, I was about to leap up and run when he spoke. "Don't run yet, Madison. I know who you are." My heart thumped violently, stunned and speechless. For the first time today, someone recognized me. "You know me. What's happening to me? Why doesn't anyone else remember me?" The man's lips curled into a mysterious smile as he replied softly, "You're not the first this has happened to. Many others before you have suffered the same fate. And now it's your turn." A chill ran down my spine, but I fought down the fear bubbling up inside. Why me? What did I do wrong? Standing up, he handed me an old, faded photograph. I shuddered as I gazed at the blurry faces. To my shock, I saw my own face clearly in the center, surrounded by unfamiliar strangers. "You must find yourself again through your memories. Return to where everything began. But be cautious. Not all memories can be trusted." With that, the mysterious man melted into the bustling crowd, leaving me frozen in horror and confusion. Cold winds blew around me, the sky darkening ominously, as if foreshadowing a nightmare about to unfold. Determined despite my fear, I rose from the bench. It was time to uncover the truth. Did I truly exist, or was I merely a wandering ghost trapped in this uncertain world. Night fell hurriedly, cloaking the town in a chilling mist, as if intent on swallowing the whole world into its embrace. I wandered through familiar streets, now strangely alien and terrifyingly cold. Dim street lights cast their feeble glow over deserted corners, desperately clinging to faint threads of life, trying to resist the thickening darkness slowly consuming the small town. After the mysterious man left, I decided to return to my childhood home, the place where I grew up. It was situated at the edge of town, deep within an eerie forest that locals always avoided mentioning. My parents had moved away over a decade ago, yet the image of the old house with its broken wooden fence and neglected garden still haunted my dreams relentlessly. I knew that returning to that house was the only way to comprehend what was happening. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, becoming clearer and increasingly ominous. You must find yourself within your memories, but beware, not every memory is real. His words chilled me to the bone, yet simultaneously propelled me forward. The journey through the dense, dark woods was lit only by my phone's faint glow. Dry leaves crunched loudly beneath my feet, mingling with the constant chirping of insects, as if warning me of something terrifying that lay ahead. The house emerged beneath the pale moonlight, gloomy and isolated, resembling a lonely spirit awaiting someone's return. I gently pushed open the wooden gate, its eerie creaking slicing through the silence. The closer I got, the faster my heart beat. An unsettling mixture of familiarity and dread filled me, making me hesitate. I climbed onto the porch, my trembling hand opening the front door. Inside, musty air and thick dust immediately filled my lungs, causing me to cough uncontrollably. My flashlight's weak beam illuminated shadowed corners. Every step triggered unsettling creaks from the dilapidated floorboards, as if the house might collapse at any moment. Suddenly, from a room at the far end of the corridor, came a soft sound, a child's whisper, as if someone was quietly conversing. I froze in place, my heart skipping a beat. Gathering all my courage, I slowly walked toward that room, gripping my phone tightly. The door opened slightly, revealing an empty room. At its center stood only an old chair, atop which rested a worn-out cloth doll. Its deep, black eyes stared directly at me, as though it had waited there forever. As I stepped closer, a clear, childlike voice rang out behind me. "Madison, are you finally home?" I spun around sharply, seeing a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, standing at the doorway. She wore a dirty white dress covered in mud. Her pale face was frighteningly gaunt, expressionless eyes locked on mine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" I stammered. Without answering, the girl turned silently, heading toward a staircase leading down into a pitch-black basement. I swallowed hard, hesitated briefly, and then decided to follow. My phone's light gradually weakened as I descended the cold steps, each one feeling like stepping deeper into the jaws of some massive beast. Upon reaching the basement, the girl vanished abruptly. Terrified, I called out loudly, "Hey, little girl, where are you? Come out!" My words met only deathly silence. As I waved my flashlight around the basement, I noticed disturbing scrawled writings on the far wall, written in something dark red, resembling dried blood. "You've forgotten us, and now the world will forget you." Before I could grasp what was happening, an icy hand gripped my ankle. I screamed, yanking my foot away, tumbling onto the freezing floor. Swinging the flashlight toward the ground, I saw countless pale, ghostly hands emerging from the soil, desperately grasping at me. Panicked, I stumbled upright and fled toward the stairs. Yet the steps seemed endless, stretching impossibly upward. Helplessness and despair overwhelmed me. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed from behind. "Madison, sweetheart, where are you going?" Turning, I saw my mother at the bottom of the staircase, her sad eyes fixed on me. But now, her face was ghastly pale, lifeless like a corpse. "Mom, why are you like this?" I asked, trembling. She reached out her hand, offering a gentle yet sinister smile. "Come back to me, dear. Everyone here misses you. You don't have to go anywhere else." I stepped back, tears streaming down my face, overcome by fear and anguish. At that moment, I realized that behind my mother stood countless shadowy figures, all moving toward me with terrifying, hungry eyes. "No, I don't belong here," I shouted, desperately trying to escape the expanding darkness chasing after me. Bursting out of the house, I collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. Dawn began breaking, scattering faint morning light. Yet deep down, I knew that this nightmare journey was far from over. I had to move forward, had to uncover the truth at any cost before that relentless darkness swallowed me whole forever. After fleeing that terrifying house, I ran until my legs could no longer carry me. My mind was spinning, and the biting cold clung to my body like invisible hands pulling me back. Morning light slowly crept over the horizon, but inside me, the darkness had yet to fade. Leaning against an old tree by a narrow road, I tried to take deep breaths to calm myself. The images I had just witnessed spun relentlessly in my head. My mother's pale face twisted into a grotesque smile, the ghostly hands reaching up from the earth, and above all, the haunting message on the cellar wall. "You forgot us, and now the world will forget you." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind me made me spin around in fright. A middle-aged woman with long, wavy blonde hair was staring at me intently. Her eyes were deep, filled with a sorrow I couldn't comprehend. Who are you?" I asked wearily. She smiled gently, but there was a strange chill in her gaze. "My name is Eleanor, and like you, I am someone who once existed." Her words made my heart skip a beat. I could feel it racing again, as if something dreadful was about to be revealed. "What do you mean?" "Once existed?" I whispered, unable to hide the confusion in my voice. Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes still locked onto mine, as if peering straight into my soul. "All of us, the ones the world has forgotten, we made a mistake that brought pain to those we loved. Our memories slowly faded until we were completely erased from their minds." I shivered from fear and disbelief. "But I don't remember doing anything wrong. I've always loved my family. How could I have—" Eleanor cut me off with a voice cold as ice. "Memory doesn't always tell the truth. Sometimes it changes to protect us from a far more painful reality." She gestured for me to follow her, leading me to a small suburban neighborhood I had never seen before. The houses here were worn and decaying, as if time itself had abandoned them. They stood silently, mournfully, like they too had once existed, once held life before being swallowed by the void. Eleanor stopped in front of a small white house with a door slightly ajar. Her eyes looked sadder than ever. "Go inside, Madison. This is where you'll start to understand the truth." I hesitated, a chill running down my spine. but I knew I couldn't turn her back. I needed answers, no matter what awaited behind that door. As I stepped inside, a cold gust blew from within, making me tremble. The house was colder than outside and carried the musty scent of rotting wood mixed with something foul, something long dead. I moved cautiously deeper into the house. Suddenly, the faded photographs lining the hallway caught my eye. Each photo was old and worn, but what terrified me most was that every face had been blacked out, except for the eyes, wide open, full of sorrow and blame. "Do you recognize them?" Eleanor whispered behind me. Startled, I turned to her and shook my head. "No, I've never seen them before." Eleanor sighed softly, her voice barely audible. "They are the ones you forgot, Madison. The ones you left behind. And now, like them, you have been abandoned by the world." "No, that's not true," I cried in despair. "I never left anyone behind." Eleanor gave me a sad smile and pointed down the hallway. "Keep going. You'll understand when you see them." Trembling, I walked toward the last room. As I reached for the doorknob, a muffled sob came from inside, freezing me in place. I slowly opened the door. Inside, the dim light of a candle flickered on a small table. A group of people stood in the center of the room, backs turned to me, their bodies trembling as if in mourning. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice shaking. Suddenly, the entire group turned around. Their faces were pale and sickly, riddled with deep wounds. They stared at me with eyes full of pain, hatred, and betrayal. "You don't remember us, Madison?" one voice said, thick with resentment. "You said we'd be friends forever, but you left us when we needed you the most." One by one, they stepped closer, their blood-stained hands reaching out, their mouths whispering terrible accusations. I stumbled backward, terrified beyond words. "I don't know. I swear I don't remember any of this," I screamed, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. Eleanor appeared behind me, placing a cold hand on my shoulder. Her voice was like frozen wind. "Madison, this is only the beginning. To break the curse of being forgotten, you must return their memories, or be consumed by the eternal darkness." Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth. There was no turning back. The darkness of the room crept closer, ready to erase even the final fragments of who I was, pulling me deeper into a nightmare with no end. Story 6. The Eyes of the Devil. My name is Ethan. I'm 16 years old and a sophomore at Westwood High School, an old, worn-down school located in the outskirts of Ohio. My high school life had always been painfully ordinary, until one gloomy morning in early September, when Ms. Amanda Collins arrived as our new homeroom teacher. That morning, the sky was overcast, thick gray clouds covering the sun like a bad omen. When the bell rang for the first class, everyone shuffled to their seats. From the classroom door, our new teacher appeared, her figure drifting silently into the room, almost as if she were floating. Not a single footstep could be heard. I noticed her immediately. She looked unlike any teachers I had ever seen. Miss Amanda had a thin, delicate frame and skin so pale, it looked as though there was no blood left beneath its surface. Her long, jet-black hair flowed down to her waist, in stark contrast to her sickly complexion. But what truly unsettled me, what would later become my obsession, were her eyes. They were always wide open, unnaturally so, and never blinked, like the glass eyes of a porcelain doll. At first, I assumed it was just nerves, or maybe a strange personal quirk. But as days turned into weeks, then months, I realized it never changed. For 4 entire months, not once did I see Miss Amanda blink. When I told others, they laughed it off. No one believed me. No one cared about something so small and bizarre. They thought I was just trying to get attention. Eventually, I stopped talking about it and kept the growing dread to myself. But the dread dug deeper into my subconscious. Sometimes, during class, I'd sneak glances at her, studying her intensely, hoping to catch even the slightest flicker. But it was useless. Those vacant, lifeless eyes never blinked. It was as if she wasn't human, but something else entirely. One freezing January afternoon, after school had ended and I was packing up my things, I suddenly heard her cold voice behind me. "Ethan, stay for a moment." I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. The classroom was empty, just me and her. Miss Amanda stood motionless, her expression blank, her unblinking eyes locked onto mine. I forced myself to stay calm and walk toward her. Is something wrong, Miss Amanda?" I asked quietly. She leaned in closer, her pale, lifeless face now only inches from mine. Her breath was dry and cold, like wind passing through a frozen cave. Then she whispered in my ear, her voice like a deathly breeze. "Because I don't need it anymore." A chill surged down my spine. I stumbled backward, hitting a desk and nearly falling over. When I looked back up, she hadn't moved. Still standing there, still staring at me, her eyes drilling through my soul. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted from the classroom, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty hall, like I was running from something too terrible to name. That very night, back home, I started searching for any information I could find about Miss Amanda Collins, on social media, on the school website. But oddly, nothing came up. It was as if she didn't exist before she arrived at Westwood. The next morning, I decided to speak with Principal Keller. I needed to tell someone about how strange she was. But as soon as I began, he cut me off coldly. "Ethan, don't waste your time with nonsense. Miss Amanda is a fine teacher. I advise you not to stir up any more trouble." I tried to read his face, hoping to find some clue, but there was nothing. He looked utterly emotionless, detached, like he knew something, but chose to keep it buried. From that day on, going to school became a nightmare. I could feel her unblinking gaze following me, tracking every move. My friends began to drift away from me, whispering behind my back that I was losing my mind. They thought I was making things up for attention. I became more and more isolated, even in my own classroom. Then the nightmares began. In my dreams, I always saw those eyes, wide, cold, staring. One night, I woke up drenched in cold sweat, heart pounding. As I tried to calm myself, I suddenly noticed a figure standing still under the dim streetlight outside my bedroom window. It was Miss Amanda. Her eyes, wide open, were fixed on my window. Then slowly, the corners of her mouth curled upward into a distorted smile. A smile that no human should ever have. I was paralyzed. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. In that chilling moment, I realized that the fear I had dismissed as obsession was real. Those unblinking eyes were no harmless oddity. They were a warning of something horrifying that was only just beginning. And the worst part, it seemed like I was the only one who could see the truth. The next morning, when I woke up, I tried to convince myself that what I saw last night was just a hallucination. But Amanda's soulless eyes, and especially that twisted smile, still lingered vividly in my mind, haunting every breath I took. I stepped outside. The faint winter sunlight wasn't enough to ease my anxiety. Every step towards school felt heavier, as if something or someone was trying to hold me back. As soon as I entered the classroom, I looked around but didn't see Miss Amanda. A small sense of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by unease. Before I could settle into my seat, a strange man walked into the room. He introduced himself as Mr. John Harris, a substitute teacher filling in for Amanda today. Confusion struck me. Amanda had never missed a single day of teaching. Could what happened last night be real? Had she realized that I was onto something? During lunch break, I walked out to the school's backyard, hoping to find some peace of mind. But before I could collect my thoughts, a familiar voice called out. It was Hannah, my childhood best friend. Ethan, I need to talk to you. I looked at her in surprise. Ever since I mentioned Amanda's unblinking eyes, Hannah had been distant. I thought you were just being paranoid, she admitted, her eyes full of guilt. But last night, something weird happened. I couldn't sleep, so I opened my window for some fresh air. I saw Amanda standing in front of your house. She just stood there, like a statue, for a long time before walking away. And I swear, Ethan, her eyes, they never blinked. A chill ran down my spine. So it wasn't just me. Hannah had seen it too. This wasn't some hallucination. It was real. We need to find out more about her, I said firmly. After school, Hannah and I decided to secretly investigate Amanda. We started with the school's records archive, a rarely visited room tucked behind the old library. As we stepped inside, a cold draft clung to the air like a thin fog. The flickering overhead light buzzed, as if warning us not to go further. We sifted through dozens of files, but there was no record of Amanda Collins anywhere. The unease grew stronger with every folder we opened. What if she's not even a real teacher? Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, a soft noise echoed from behind the door. We quickly ducked into a dark corner. Through a small gap, I saw Principal Keller standing just outside, scanning the room cautiously before leaving without a word. He knows something, I whispered, my voice shaking. We decided to dig into the school's past, hoping to uncover something that could explain Amanda's mysterious appearance. The next day, I went to the town library and searched for any strange incidents connected to Westwood High. As I flipped through old newspapers, I froze at a decades-old headline. Young teacher mysteriously vanishes. It was an unsolved case from over 20 years ago. The black and white photo beside the article made my skin crawl. Despite the grainy image, I instantly recognized the face. Amanda Collins. My whole body went numb. My breathing grew shallow. How could someone who vanished over 20 years ago be teaching at my school, let alone be my homeroom teacher? That night, Hannah and I visited Amanda Collins's abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The house was overrun with vines and moss. The wooden door looked like it could collapse at any moment. Inside was pitch dark, lit only by the weak beams from our flashlights. The house was deathly cold and eerily silent, as if the breath of the dead still lingered. We moved cautiously, each creaking floorboard beneath us groaning like a wounded spirit. We checked every room, finding nothing but ruin and decay. until we reached the last room. A small bed lay under layers of dust. My flashlight happened to land on the wall, and my heart stopped. Etched into the faded paint were crude words carved by a trembling hand. I don't need eyes anymore, because I've seen enough. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us with a thunderous bang. We rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Something invisible was holding it shut. Then our flashlights went out. I heard Hannah's quick panicked breathing beside me, and then, layered beneath it, the faintest whisper, like a voice carried from some distant past. You shouldn't have come here. I don't need eyes anymore, but I'll take yours. A freezing gust blew through the room, brushing past our skin like a ghostly presence. In the suffocating darkness, I whispered in fear. Amanda, is it you? A bone-chilling laugh echoed from the shadows. Soft, sinister, unhinged. Yes, it's me, Ethan. I've seen enough. And now you'll see what I saw. Her voice faded into silence, but I knew, deep down, we were no longer safe. The memories of the dead, those terrifying memories, had begun to awaken. And I realized we had stepped into a nightmare, a twisted game where the players were spirits who had never known rest. The door burst open without warning. Hannah and I rushed outside, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding as if ready to explode. We didn't dare look back. We just ran, as fast as we could, away from Amanda Collins' abandoned house. Behind us, that chilling laughter still echoed, lodging itself deep within my mind. Once we were far enough to feel somewhat safe, I stopped and tried to calm both myself and Hannah. Her face was pale as paper, her eyes filled with sheer terror. What does she want from us, Ethan? Hannah whispered, trembling. I don't know, I panted, but I'm sure she won't stop so easily. The next day at school, Hannah and I agreed to stay silent. We knew no one would believe what we had just experienced, but the moment we stepped into class, a strange chill enveloped the room. Every student turned their gaze on me, blank, emotionless stares, as if they had all become living dolls. What's going on? Hannah whispered uneasily. Before I could answer, Principal Keller walked into the room. His sharp gaze carried something deeply disturbing. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward us and said coldly, Ethan, Hannah, come to my office now. We walked in a tense, suffocating silence. The hallway was completely deserted, save for the echo of our footsteps. As we stepped into the principal's office, I froze. Amanda was already standing there. She didn't move. Her eyes were wide open, staring directly at us, unblinking. You came to my house last night, didn't you? Amanda's voice was like ice, each word piercing into my mind like needles. I tried to stay calm and replied, Who are you really? We know you're not the real Amanda Collins. She's been missing for over 20 years. Amanda's lips curled into that familiar cold smile. That's right. I'm no longer Amanda. The real Amanda died a long time ago. I just borrowed her body. Hannah trembled beside me. I gripped her hand tightly, trying to shield her from the rising panic. Why us? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Why did you choose us? Because you saw me, she replied. No one else can see the things you two see, Ethan. Only your eyes are good enough for me to use. Her words sent an icy chill down my spine. I remembered the writing on the walls in her house the night before. She really wanted to take our eyes. Enough, Principal Keller suddenly spoke. His face stone cold, voice firm but tinged with helplessness. Amanda, stop this. Don't hurt anyone else. They're innocent. Amanda turned to him, her blank eyes now filled with menace. You have no right to interfere, Keller. You made a promise, remember? Principal Keller fell silent, his face turning ashen. It was then I realized. He knew everything. He had even helped her continue this horrifying existence. The air in the room thickened with dread. I knew that if we stayed, something terrible would happen. I grabbed Hannah's hand and bolted out the door, leaving Amanda's chilling scream behind us. You won't escape me. We ran straight out of the school and headed for the town library. I needed to know more about the real Amanda. Needed to find a way to end this. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Henderson, looked startled as we rushed in. But when I mentioned Amanda Collins, her expression shifted to one of worry and confusion. What do you know about Miss Amanda? She asked in a hushed voice, as though afraid someone might hear. We know she went missing years ago. Is she really dead, ma'am? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Mrs. Henderson looked around, then led us to a more private corner. Her voice trembled with emotion. Over 20 years ago, Amanda Collins was a young teacher who had just started at Westwood. But soon, she began behaving strangely, staring unblinking at her students. Not long after, she vanished without a trace. The only thing left behind was a message scrawled on the classroom board. I will return for your eyes. What happened to her? Hannah asked, her voice quivering. Mrs. Henderson sighed, her face heavy with sorrow. They say Amanda was cursed, her soul trapped in eternal darkness. Since then, every few years, a strange new teacher shows up at Westwood, and each time, students disappear. None of them are ever found. Hannah and I stared at each other in shock. We both understood now. Amanda didn't just want our eyes. She wanted more. She wanted our souls, trapped with hers in that endless darkness. And the most terrifying part was the realization that our classmates, one by one, were slowly becoming her puppets. She had already begun her plan, and this time, no one would be able to stop her. The true battle against the darkness had only just begun. After meeting with Mrs. Henderson, Hannah and I knew we had to act before Amanda could complete her twisted plan. The librarian's words echoed endlessly in my mind, like a persistent curse that refused to let go. Now, every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wide, unblinking eyes waiting for me in the dark. We returned to my house, hiding away in a dimly lit room. Hannah sat curled up in the corner of the bed, gripping her phone with trembling hands. The air was thick and heavy, as if Amanda could emerge from the shadows at any moment. Ethan, what do we do now? Hannah whispered, her voice quivering with helplessness. I sighed, trying to reassure both her and myself. Amanda wants our eyes. Mrs. Henderson said she's cursed, so there has to be a way to break that curse. Hannah looked up at me, her eyes pleading. But how? Then I remembered the strange way Principal Keller had acted in his office. He knew something, maybe everything. He was hiding the truth. We needed to find out what exactly he was covering up. That night, once darkness had fallen over the town, Hannah and I snuck into Westwood High. The school was eerily quiet and unnaturally cold. The pale moonlight cast dancing shadows through the windows, creating ghostly figures along the endless hallway. We crept toward Principal Keller's office. The door was slightly ajar, with a faint light glowing from within. I peeked through the gap and saw Keller sitting at his desk, looking tense, his hands trembling as he held an old photograph. I gently pushed the door open and stepped inside, with Hannah hesitantly staying close behind. Principal Keller looked up with a start, his eyes filled with shock and fear. "Ethan? Hannah? What are you two doing here at this hour?" "We need the truth, sir," I said firmly, my gaze unwavering. "We know you're hiding something about Amanda Collins. Please, tell us everything." Keller let out a long sigh, his eyes filled with sorrow. He handed me the worn photograph. In it, Amanda Collins was young and radiant, her eyes full of life, so different from the hollow gaze she had now. "Amanda was once a student at this school," Keller began, his voice heavy, as though recalling a painful past. "She was kind, full of potential, but she became obsessed with an old legend in this town." "What legend?" Hannah asked, her voice shaking. Keller glanced around as if someone might be listening, then lowered his voice. "The legend of the white-eyed spirit. According to folklore, it returns every 20 years, searching for pure eyes to steal, so it can see the light again. Amanda was once a victim, and now she's become that spirit." My heart pounded. It was all becoming clear. Amanda was no longer Amanda. She had become something far more terrifying. "Then why did you stay silent all this time?" I asked. Keller looked down, his voice breaking. "Because Amanda is my sister. I couldn't stop her. But now, she's too powerful, and I'm afraid she'll hurt more people, including you two." We were stunned. The truth was heavier than we could have imagined, but just then, the lights in the office flickered violently. A cold wind swept through the room, blasting the windows open and sending papers flying. From the shadows, a chilling, familiar voice hissed with venom. "You betrayed me, Keller?" Amanda stepped out from the darkness, her frame gaunt, her skin pale, her eyes wider than ever, frozen in a deathly stare. She glared at Keller with an icy hatred. "Amanda, stop!" Keller shouted, trying to stay composed. Amanda smiled, a twisted, inhuman grin that chilled us to the bone. I lost my eyes and soul to it. Do you know how it feels to never close your eyes again? Now it's their turn. She lunged at us, her pale hands reaching out to strangle me. Hannah and I dodged to the side just in time. Keller cried out and tried to stop her, but Amanda shoved him hard into the wall. He collapsed, unconscious. I grabbed Hannah's hand and pulled her out of the office. Amanda screamed behind us, her footsteps echoing through the dark corridor as she gave chase. We ran blindly through the hallway until we came to an abrupt stop. Blocking our path were other students from the school, dozens of them, standing still, their eyes wide and lifeless, unblinking just like Amanda's. They stared straight at us. "Don't resist, Ethan," Amanda whispered behind me. "Give me your eyes, so I can finally escape this darkness." I froze, feeling Hannah's trembling grip tighten around my hand. In front of us were rows of soulless stairs. Behind us, Amanda burned with rage. I knew if I didn't do something, everything would end in eternal darkness. Then I remembered what Miss Henderson had said. To end the curse, we had to destroy its source, the eyes. I closed my eyes and screamed into the darkness, summoning every ounce of strength. "Amanda, you can't take our eyes. The eyes you truly seek belong to the spirit that cursed you." Amanda froze, her face twisted with pain. A terrible scream ripped through the air, and everything was swallowed by silence and shadow. But deep down, I knew this battle was far from over. Story 7, The Corpse That Still Moves. I never believed in strange, unexplainable phenomena. But sometimes, things happen that defy logic, especially when those things unfold right beside you, in your daily life, in the heart of a modern American city. My name is Jake Thomas. I work for a media company in downtown Seattle. Our office is on the 27th floor of a skyscraper, buzzing each day with the voices and laughter of over 200 employees. I liked it here, even if the pressure sometimes drained me. But I never could have imagined that one day I would witness a truth far beyond anyone's understanding. That morning was unusually gloomy. A light drizzle misted the tall glass windows with a cold, silvery haze. I arrived early, like always, and saw my colleague, Alex Evans, already at his desk. Alex always looked pale, with dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks. But today, he looked even worse. His face was ashen, and his lifeless eyes were fixed on the dark computer screen in front of him. "Alex, are you okay?" I asked as I approached, a bit concerned. He flinched as if waking from a long dream, and slowly turned his hollow eyes toward me. "Yeah, I'm fine, Jake," he replied hoarsely. "Just a bit tired." I wanted to say more, to maybe comfort him, but my phone rang and pulled me away from that unsettling conversation. A few hours later, during our company's annual health checkup, I started to notice something truly strange about Alex. He sat next to me in the waiting area, motionless, his hands resting stiffly on his knees like a statue. When it was his turn to go in, I couldn't help but glance at him through the narrow gap in the door. 10 minutes passed. Then the doctor came out, looking confused and tense. I overheard him whispering to the nurse beside him. "It's bizarre. I couldn't detect a heartbeat." "Are you sure?" the nurse asked, skeptical. "I checked several times. The monitor didn't pick up anything either." My own heart began to race. How could someone be alive without a heartbeat? It had to be some kind of equipment failure or a mistake. I tried to reassure myself, but something in my gut was screaming that this was not normal. I could barely concentrate for the rest of the day. I kept stealing glances at Alex. He sat there, quiet and disturbingly calm. His movements were stiff, mechanical, like he was trying to mimic the behavior of a real human. After work, the rain had picked up. I pulled my coat tight and hurried toward the underground parking lot beneath the building. As I descended the steps, I suddenly felt a chill creeping up the back of my neck. It felt like someone was watching me. I turned around. Alex was there. He stood at the entrance, unmoving in the dim light, his eyes wide open and lifeless. Unblinking, my heart skipped, my throat went dry. "Alex, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. My breathing quickened. Something was very, very wrong. I rushed to my car, started the engine, and sped out of the garage. At home, I locked every door, closed all the curtains, and tried to convince myself I was just overreacting. I forced down a little food and lay in bed, hoping sleep would bring peace. But my mind kept drifting back to the haunting image of Alex. Around midnight, my phone buzzed violently. I jumped up, grabbed it, and checked the screen. A text from a coworker. "Jake, I just passed your apartment. Someone's been standing outside your door for a long time. Looks creepy as hell." I bolted to the window and flung the curtain aside. Under the flickering streetlight, Right in front of my house stood Alex. He was still there, in the rain, same posture, same eyes, no movement, no expression. Just a pale, empty face. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was stare at Alex, the man with no heartbeat, standing just meters away from me. An hour passed, then two. He didn't move an inch. The long, cold night dragged on, stretched thin like a taut string about to snap. 6 hours. He stood motionless outside my door for 6 hours, as if waiting for me to come out. At dawn, the first light broke through the mist. I saw Alex slowly turn, walk down the deserted street, and vanish into the pale morning. I stood there, still trembling, unable to comprehend what had just happened. But I knew one thing for certain. That man, the one who lives without a heartbeat, has begun to watch me. And I fear this nightmare is only just beginning. The morning after that horrifying night came faster than I expected. I sat motionless on the sofa in the dim living room, eyes fixed on the window, half hoping, half dreading that Alex's figure might appear again. But the street outside had returned to normal. People bustled about as if nothing strange had happened the night before. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was just overly stressed. Maybe it was all just a strange coincidence. But deep down, I knew Alex was no longer Alex. Or at least, he was no longer human in the way we understood. After a long hesitation, I reluctantly got up and prepared to head to the office like usual. The morning chill wrapped around me as I stepped out into the street. Seattle was blanketed in gray clouds that day, but the rain had momentarily stopped, leaving behind a stifling, uneasy air. When I arrived at work, I immediately noticed something unusual. Everyone was murmuring about Alex, but not for the reason I had feared. They said he had called in for the day without giving a reason. I felt slightly relieved, but the sense of dread from last night still clung to me. "Jake, are you okay?" came Claire's soft voice from behind, making me jump. Claire was the new hire with a desk right next to Alex's. Her blonde hair and bright blue eyes usually radiated warmth, but not today. There was worry in her gaze. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied quickly, trying to mask the unease on my face. "Why?" She hesitated before leaning in to whisper. "I thought it was nothing, but Alex was acting really weird yesterday," she said softly. "He just stared at his blank computer screen for over an hour. He didn't answer when I talked to him. It was like he couldn't hear me." Her story only deepened my fear. I decided not to keep it to myself anymore. I told her everything that happened the previous night. When I finished, Claire's face had gone pale. She clenched her fists, biting her lip in worry. "Should we call the police?" she asked quietly. "I'm not sure," I replied, hesitating. "They'll probably think we're crazy." Before we could continue, a loud noise echoed from the hallway, making both of us flinch. We rushed out and saw a crowd gathered around a colleague, Nathan. He was lying motionless on the floor, his eyes rolled back and lifeless. A medic from the emergency team was trying to resuscitate him, but it was clear their efforts were in vain. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Nathan was the one who had messaged me the night before, warning me about the strange figure outside my door. And now he lay there, still cold, gone. I instinctively stepped back, gripping the door frame to keep from collapsing. The rest of the day passed under a heavy cloud of dread. Nathan was taken away. and the official explanation was a sudden heart attack. But I knew Nathan. He was healthy. No history of heart issues. This couldn't just be a coincidence. That afternoon, I went to Alex's apartment. I know how crazy it sounds, but I had to know what was going on. When I arrived, apartment 27 was sealed shut, completely silent. I knocked on the door. The hollow sound echoed down the empty hallway. No answer. Suddenly, the door to the neighboring unit creaked open. An elderly man stepped out, eyeing me with suspicion. "Looking for Alex?" he asked. "Yes. Do you know where he went?" I responded politely. He stared at me for a moment before lowering his voice, as if afraid someone might be listening. "You're not the first to come asking," he murmured. "The police were here this morning. That apartment, it's empty. No one's been living there. No sign that anyone has for over a week." It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Alex had lived in that apartment for over 2 years. How could there be no sign of it? I left the building, my head spinning, 1,000 questions buzzing through my mind. I returned home, more uneasy than ever. Night fell quickly. Darkness wrapped the city in a thick, suffocating blanket. Around 11, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. I held my breath and listened. The steps were unnaturally light, deliberate, like someone trying to walk slowly, quietly, so as not to be noticed. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against it, heart pounding like a drum. "Jake." A faint whisper came from the other side. It was Alex's voice, but weak, distorted, like it was coming from deep inside a long, narrow tunnel. I froze, throat tight. "Jake, open the door. I'm so cold." The voice came again, closer now, clearer. I backed away, my whole body trembling. Just then, my phone rang loudly. I jumped, grabbing it. A message flashed on the screen from an unknown number. "Don't open the door. That's not Alex." I looked back at the door, heart pounding wildly in my chest. Something was out there, something that wore Alex's face. But it wasn't him. And I knew, without a doubt, I was being hunted. The door continued to rattle gently, as if someone or something was trying to force me to open it by any means necessary. That weak, ghostly voice kept whispering my name in the oppressive silence. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I knew whatever was out there, despite wearing Alex's face, was not him. The phone rang again. I quickly looked down. This time, the caller ID showed a name I wasn't expecting. Claire. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. "Jake, are you okay?" Claire's voice trembled, and I could feel the panic in every syllable. "Claire, where are you?" I'm at Alex's apartment. "You need to come here. Now. I found something. Something strange. Please hurry." Her voice was shaking like she had just witnessed something horrifying. I clenched the phone, momentarily forgetting the thing outside my door. When I looked up again, the knocking had stopped. A cold shiver crept down my spine. Maybe it was gone. But I still didn't dare open the door to check. Throwing on my coat, I peeked through the peephole. The hallway outside was dark and empty, like a tunnel with no end. I took a deep breath, then pushed the door open and stepped into the void. No one was there. The corridor was deserted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me from the shadows. There was no time to think. I ran to the parking lot and sped off toward the apartment complex where Alex had lived. My mind raced the entire drive. Who was Alex really? Or rather, what was this thing that looked like him searching for? I arrived in just 20 minutes. Apartment 207's door was ajar. A faint light spilling into the cold hallway, like the gaping mouth of a cave waiting for prey. I crept closer, nudged the door open, and stepped inside, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The room was nearly empty and cloaked in shadows, save for a few dusty pieces of furniture. Claire stood silently by the window, her face pale and tense. "I'm here," I whispered, breaking the stillness. Claire turned to look at me, eyes wide with fear. She shakily pointed toward a corner of the living room. I followed her gaze to a small box sitting on the table, lightly covered in dust, as if recently unearthed. I approached cautiously, lifted the lid, and found a bundle of photographs and an old leather-bound journal inside. We exchanged glances, suspicious, curious. I slowly flipped open the journal, the scent of old paper mingling with the stifling air. The handwriting inside was shaky, as though the writer had endured something unimaginable. March 12th, 2018. I feel my heart growing weaker every day. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong, but I know something is taking my heartbeat away. I see it at night, standing by the window, watching me for hours. My heart skipped a beat. It was Alex's handwriting. I frantically flipped through the next pages. The further I read, the more twisted and deranged the writing became. May 23rd, 2018. My heart has stopped, but I'm still alive. How is this possible? I can still breathe, still move, but I feel nothing. No joy, no pain, nothing. I'm scared I'm no longer myself. Claire stood frozen as I handed her the journal. She trembled as her frightened blue eyes locked onto mine. "Is it possible that Alex has been dead for a long time?" she whispered, and her question sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, a loud thud echoed from the bedroom. We both turned sharply. My heart leapt into my throat. A shadow darted past the open doorway. I glanced at Claire. She had gone completely pale. Neither of us said a word. I took a step toward the room, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I slowly pushed the door open. The first thing I saw was a large photograph displayed in the middle of the room, surrounded by dozens of extinguished candles. The picture showed Alex, though he looked much younger. Beside him stood Nathan and a few other people I didn't recognize. They were all smiling brightly, as if celebrating something. Scrawled on the back of the photo were the words, "August 2017, Brothers Forever." Before I could process the full meaning, a cold voice rang out behind me. "They betrayed me." I spun around. Claire screamed. Alex was standing in the doorway, his face pale and lifeless, his eyes milky white, lips barely moving as he whispered. They traded my heartbeat to save their own lives. Nathan was the first to pay the price, and now he stared directly at me, his gaze empty and dead, yet somehow piercing straight into my soul. I knew, without question, that this time he wasn't letting anyone go. Just then, Claire's phone rang, the sound slicing through the tension like a knife. She picked it up with trembling hands, and within seconds, her face went stark white. "Jake, they just found Alex's body in a lake 2 hours ago." I stared at her, then turned back to the thing in front of us. It smiled, a warped, grotesque grin. "That's right. I'm already dead," it whispered. "And now, it's your turn." I never imagined I'd come face to face with death so directly, until now. In the dim light, Alex, or rather, whatever thing was wearing his face, stood motionless at the doorway. The smile on his face was twisted, colder than ever. His eyes were hollow, deep like an endless abyss, piercing straight through my mind. Beside me, Claire had completely broken down. Her legs trembled uncontrollably, her face pale with terror. She clung to my arm, her nails digging deep into my skin, snapping me back into clarity. Time seemed to stop. The room was suffocatingly silent, with only the sound of our shaky breaths cutting through the stillness. What do you want? I forced the words out, my voice so weak I barely recognized it as my own. The thing in Alex's form tilted its head at a disturbing angle, as if enjoying the fear it was causing. A heavy silence hung over us until suddenly it spoke. Its voice raspy, distorted, almost unrecognizable. I want to take back what I lost, Jake. Nathan betrayed me, but he was only the first. Alex stepped forward. His movements were slow, stiff, like his body was being pulled along by invisible strings. A wave of icy dread swept over me as he drew closer. I stepped back, but the wall blocked my escape. Claire sobbed beside me, her grip tightening. "Let us go," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady, but he only smiled, a cold, warped grin brimming with death. "I can't do that. You know too much. We will become one. No one can know who I am, or what I truly am." Before I could react, Alex lunged forward. His hand, cold as stone, clamped around my throat. The strength he possessed was inhuman. I felt the oxygen drain from my lungs, the world growing dim. Until, suddenly, the wail of a police siren pierced the air outside. He froze. Alex let go of me and turned his head sharply toward the window, his expression flickering with rage. Claire seized the moment, darting toward the door and screaming for help. Below, flashing red and blue lights flooded the street, and officers in blue uniforms swarmed the area. Gasping for air, I struggled to stay upright, feeling the blood slowly return to my limbs. "We are not finished," Alex hissed with venom, then turned and melted into the shadows, vanishing as if he'd never been there at all. Claire collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her small frame shaking. I rushed to her, trying to comfort her, though I myself had no idea how we were going to escape this nightmare. Not 2 minutes later, the apartment was locked down by the police. Detective Reynolds, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and a stern expression, stepped into the room. He looked at us with sharp, assessing eyes. "Jake Thomas, is that you?" he asked, his voice low, calm, but commanding. "Yes, that's me," I replied shakily. "We just found the body of Alex Evans. He died over 2 weeks ago." Which raises the question, why are the two of you here? I hesitated, glancing at Claire, then began recounting everything that had happened. I knew it sounded insane, impossible, but Reynolds listened silently, his expression unreadable, as if stories like this weren't unfamiliar to him. "I believe you," Reynolds suddenly said when I finished. I stared at him in disbelief. He gestured for the 2 younger officers to leave the room, then slowly sat down on a dusty chair, his eyes dark and contemplative. "This isn't the first time," he said softly, his voice dropping as if afraid someone might hear. 10 years ago, I investigated a similar case. A group of teenagers performed a twisted ritual, offering the heartbeat of one of their own in exchange for extended life. But the cost, is always a cursed existence. My heart clenched. The pieces were falling into place. I remembered that old photograph. The writing on the back, brothers forever. Alex, Nathan, and a few others. Could they have been the group Reynolds spoke of? So, what do we do to stop this? Claire asked through tears, her voice trembling. Detective Reynolds was silent for a long time before sighing deeply. There's only one way. You have to return what was taken from him. I froze. But we didn't take anything. We had nothing to do with this, I protested. He looked at me, eyes full of sorrow and certainty. That doesn't matter anymore, Jake. You know too much now, and he'll never let you go. Just as his words sank in, the phone on the table rang. The caller ID flashed with an unknown number, blinking over and over. Reynolds nodded at me to answer. My hand trembled as I lifted the phone to my ear. A voice, cold, familiar, and inhuman, whispered from the other end. We're not finished, Jake. Remember that. I dropped the phone. The broken static echoed in the room like a lingering curse. Alex was still here. He wasn't going to stop until he reclaimed what he had lost. And now, more than ever, I knew. Claire and I were about to face a battle for survival against a man who was no longer human. A man with no heart. And in this war, there was no room for retreat.